You're listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Proteum Machining, and this week I am joined by Nick Polanosky of P3D Creations. Welcome, Nick.
Hey Dylan, thanks for having me on. I guess long-time listener, first-time caller, and by long time I mean I listened to like the first 5 episodes, somehow forgot about the podcast, and now I've listened to all of it except for like the last 5 episodes in the past 3 weeks.
I know, I
So
can't
yeah, it's
believe how
great.
much you binged. It's so funny.
So the trick is putting it on smart speed so that it skips over any dead space and it sort of accelerates a little bit, so you can make a lot of progress in a short period of time.
All
And
right,
I've loved every second of it.
awesome. Well, I really appreciate it. Well, for those who don't know you or haven't seen your Instagram or whatever, first off, what do you do? And then second, where can they find you online?
Sure. So in short, we're a prototype machine shop based in Maitland, Florida, which is a little bit east of Orlando. We do almost exclusively low volumes. It's most of the weird stuff that other shops don't really want to take, and we figure out how to do it. And there's just 3 of us in the shop, plus our couple of dogs, and we have a good time. Stay pretty busy. And you can find us generally, we're really only active on Instagram. So just Instagram at P3D Creations. We're on Facebook too. We have a website. But for the most part, if you're listening to this, probably get in touch on Instagram.
All right. Well, then, what is your backstory? How did you get to where you are now?
Okay, so this is going to take a while. We'll start at the beginning, as that is the logical place. So when I was really young, my dad and I would go out and we'd build stuff in the garage, just fun little projects. We did model trains a lot, and that's what I spent a lot of my childhood working on, especially like winters. It's too cold to go outside and ride my ATV or go on a run or something. So I went out in the garage and we started with a circle of railroad track around the Christmas tree, and then it was a 4x8 sheet of plywood. And then it was 2 and 3 and 4 4x8 sheets of plywood, and then suddenly it was the entire garage. So that probably explains where I first started working with my hands, because like you have to build that. It's figuring out how to make mountains out of like grocery store paper bags, and doing plaster casting and doing some basic electronics, because the trains all run on AC, but to actuate the whistles and bells, it's a pulse of DC injected, and there's relays to go and turn on all the accessories. And I sort of started to get a handle on how all of that stuff worked. So yeah, there's kind of my electromechanical origin story, part one. Some time passed, and then as a teenager, I kind of got into model aircraft, because my dad was a fighter pilot. He flew F-16s with the Air National Guard for 20-something years. So I was kind of always around aviation, and too young to get my pilot's license, and that was kind of expensive. So model planes were the next best thing. And again, got really into that. Spent too much money, all my spare time, and then some, just building planes, and more mechanical and like making stuff. Got a lot deeper into electronics for that, and I actually wanted to. This was, I guess, it would have been early 2010s that I really dove into this, and I saw that people were starting to fly drones around, and they were putting cameras on their airplanes and putting goggles on and doing the first person view flying. I wanted to do that, but in order to do that right, you needed to have a ham radio license. So I went and I got my ham radio license. I got my technician license, and then like 2 months later I went back and got my general license, because I realized that ham radio was actually kind of fun, and I wanted to have access to more of the spectrum. So now my hobbies throughout high school consist of model trains, model airplanes, and ham radio. And I went and rebuilt some older radio transceivers that I could get for cheap, and built potato cannons modified to take tennis balls with a fishing reel attached, so I could launch a fishing line up over a tree and then haul up a rope, and then use that to pull an antenna up the like 100-foot oak trees in the backyard. And then with homemade antennas, I mentioned, I was chatting in the Discord about the Spencer Webb podcasts. Actually, so he was a ham too, or he is. I guess he's actively doing radio stuff. But yeah, anyway, I actually made a contact from my home in Virginia at the time all the way to his neck of the woods, which was 16,000 kilometers or like 10,000 miles on 100 watts of RF power, which I know people have done more with less, But for me, in my dad's garage with a antenna that basically consisted of a pair of 2x4s and some random wire I found laying around, like that was kind of impressive to me.
That's
And like
super
that just
cool.
blew my mind that you could do that with the same amount of power as a couple of fluorescent light bulbs, and you can communicate around the world with no other infrastructure. So yeah, that was a lot of fun, and that kind of basically like I started to kind of frame my picture of the world based on all these different technologies and experiences that I had encountered. So, world was full of a bunch of black boxes before and things just worked, but you didn't know why. And then I started to figure out how things were made. I figured out how antennas worked and why, Wi-Fi worked and why cell phones worked. And I could sort of start to manipulate it to my needs. Like out in the garage, I wanted internet on my computer, but it was a detached garage like 100 feet off the house. So I took some balsa wood and some paper clips and did the math and figured out how to build like a 15 element Yagi antenna so that I
Oh my
could
god.
watch YouTube and stream like Pandora out there.
Wow.
And it worked. I think the beam was really narrow. I actually had to put the computer on, I basically had to aim the computer at the house. And so my computer was at like funny angles, but it worked. So somewhere in that confluence of radio and RC aircraft, it's probably 16, 17 at the time, and kind of wanted to make some money. I was working at a hobby shop in town just for spending money, but I mean, they paid minimum wage and it was a retail job and I hated people. So not really my style. And I figured, hey, these drones are kind of picking up. I could do some aerial photography. So this was for people who are familiar, this is pre DJI Phantom. Back when, I mean, just prior, but you still had to build it yourself. And
Hmm.
I'm like strapping Wiimote guts onto Arduinos and putting ArduPilot on it, and then it promptly flips over because the PID tuning is all wrong, and I've got to replace all the props and unbend things. But do that enough times, and you gain enough confidence to put a camera on it and try to do some stuff for money. So that was my first little taste of entrepreneurship. And
That's super cool. I actually have 80-90% of a big octocopter I built, or it was actually an X8 that
okay,
I machined the base for it and had carbon arms with like aluminum supports that I had designed and machined. And then my plan was to I had a quadcopter that I bought that had already pilot on it. And I was going to pull all the guts out of that and put it in this. And that was like just as DJI started blowing up. And I was like, man, there's no point in spending another $1,000 making this work when I'm not going to be able to get anywhere close.
yeah, imagine how salty I was when like I'm building all of this stuff from scratch using my, again, at the time before they were readily available, my homemade 3D printer. Like when the current standard was like the Mendel and like the Prusa i3 had just come out, but like it wasn't a kit. It was like you go and you look up on the RepRap site what the BOM is, and you go and you buy all the parts and you build your own crappy printer.
Right.
And so I'm like piecing things together, and then DJI comes out with the Phantom, and it's like $1,000, and it's better than anything I could ever build. But yeah, so I kind of got in before it was really accessible, made a few bucks, and then actually a buddy of mine and I went in on a really big one. So we had our small quads, and then we did a bigger X8 that was scratch built, flew a little bit nicer camera on it, and then we're like, you know what, we should do this for real. So we got it was like a 1 meter diameter octocopter, and
Wow.
we slapped a Nikon D800 on it. So this is a big, heavy thing. Unloaded, it would fly for 2 hours. Loaded, you got like 25 minutes. And again, all DIY. It was a beast. And we did that for a couple of months because we had something that was better than the Phantoms that everybody was out there with. And then the FAA started to kind of get weird about small UASs. They hadn't really decided what to do with us yet. Now there's a clear process with the Part 107.
Right.
But it was like, okay, you either can't do this at all, and then they were like, well, actually, you need to have a full commercial pilot's license. And then they're like, it's just kind of gray. Like we're coming up with something. Just like everybody, hang on for a bit. I'm like, I don't feel comfortable flying in a gray area when I live just south of DC. I don't want like FBI showing up because I'm accidentally in the wrong place. Because
Yeah.
we'd go up to Northern Virginia and do a lot of real estate shoots and stuff. I'm like, I don't want to pop up too high, show up on radar, and have my really nice multirotor knocked out by a SAM or something. So anyway, that was kind of a point where I was about to graduate high school at that point, and I kind of had a decision. I needed to figure out what I was going to do with my life. I'm like, I'm kind of liking this drone thing. And the FAA says I need to go and get a pilot's license. So, hey, Embry-Riddle, they're an aeronautical university in Daytona Beach. Let me go there. They've got a UAS program, one of like 3 in the country. UAS, unmanned aircraft systems, and then there's small UAS or SUAS you'll see commonly. So I came down here to Florida, where it is humid and hot all the time and pretty awful. Figured I'd get my degree and my pilot's license and continue that. I got about 3 days in and went, oh crap, I have no interest in learning all these rules and regulations and continuing to do like aerial photography and stuff. I'm going to have to interact with people, and often like it's either going to be like artsy type people who are sometimes high maintenance and like really specific on what they want, or it's going to be people who want like really hard data and we're going to have to do a bunch of like super technical stuff. I'm like, oh man, that sounds like a lot of work. And I started thinking about it, and I realized the drones and everything else I had done up to that point was really just a vehicle for tinkering. And the engineering track was something closer to what I actually wanted. So 3 days in, I switched from their UAS school over to their mechanical engineering school. That was a little bit more my style, but I've always sort of struggled with school. I don't do well in a classroom environment. It turns out I don't know if it's like ADHD triggered or what, but I really struggle to sit in a classroom and stay focused for an hour and a half or whatever the class is. I fall asleep. It's just impossible for me to stay awake. I've tried everything anyone has ever suggested to me, several doctors. It just happens. So I realized that after about a year of struggling, like I test well, I was doing all right and everything, but math was killing me and I couldn't stay awake there. And I'm just like, this is maybe not my thing. But remember that 3D printer I built in high school? So that was in my dorm room, and I was just printing whatever, printing little like minions from Despicable Me, and like I had met my partner in crime, Katie, when I moved down here, and she started playing with the 3D printer and everything. And halfway through my freshman year, she was like, "Hey, can you sell 3D prints for money? Can you print things for people? Is that a thing you can do?" And we looked into it, and yeah, there is. And in fact, there are websites specifically for it that make it pretty easy to take orders from other people. So still kind of like you could start to buy 3D printer kits. You could buy a MakerBot, you could buy kits and things, but they weren't nearly as ubiquitous and cheap and good as they are now. So for us with a DIY FDM printer, we got on 3D Hubs and we set up a website and we came up with a company name and we just started 3D printing things. So some design projects here and there, some simple parts for people, some pretty complicated parts for people, actually a lot of stuff for people at the school. And it wasn't making a living off of it, but it was enough to have some spending money and upgrade the printer and so on.
And that was P3D?
That was P3D, yeah.
Okay.
We thought that was just a side gig at first, but yeah, that actually ended up sustaining us, the 3D printing, for quite a while. I need to go back a little bit because there's like multiple overlapping timelines. So the RC stuff, the drone stuff, the ham radio stuff. In high school, I had an amazing teacher who really gave me the freedom to figure out what the heck I wanted to do. Mr. Webb, who will probably never hear this podcast, I guess, unless I send it to him. Mr. Webb at Spotsy High School in Virginia was probably the single biggest influence on me. He had a drafting class there. So I went and learned AutoCAD one semester. And he had a follow-up class that was just like engineering 101. And in that, we talked about just some more advanced design principles. We learned Autodesk Inventor because we had the school and student licenses for that. And he was the one who actually basically sponsored an independent study course for me, wherein I went and built that 3D printer and worked on drones. And I led the robotics team and the rocketry team there. I kind of was the rocketry team, but I had to bring 3 people per the competition bylaws. So I dragged in my friends, and of course, my friends were always down to go watch rockets go boom, as it were. And like, I could probably expand that whole section, but there's so much more that comes after this. But basically, huge thank you to that influential teacher and the freedom he gave me to actually start learning some of that stuff on my own and kind of show me the world of CAD and some more specific engineering than just screwing around in the garage. That really helped get me where I'm at now. So fast forward, okay, we've got P3D. I'm working a part-time job at a hobby shop in Daytona. I end up dropping out of college because turns out it's expensive to go to school, and if you're not doing well and if you're struggling with the teaching format, it's a really big waste to just keep throwing your time and your money at it. Now,
Yeah.
I think I could have stayed the course, and I would love to be able to say I'm a degreed mechanical engineer. But between what I had coming out of high school for like dual enrollment credits and the stuff I got done at Embry-Riddle, I've got like 2 years total, and that's I don't know. It's enough calculus to last me a lifetime. So
I'm right there with you. I did all of the calculus, but similarly to what you were describing, like I always had trouble in college staying focused on things that I didn't know the end goal. Like looking back, I took, I think, either 1 or 2 semesters of material sciences. And at the time I was like, I don't care about this. Like, why should I care what the structure of metals looks like? And now I'm like, oh man, it would have been really nice to like really pay attention and know that a little more.
yeah, well, that's the thing. Like looking back on it, I think if I had stuck around just a little bit longer, I would have gotten through the boring stuff that you have to do first as just a foundation, and I would have had an opportunity to do some of the more interesting stuff. But
Right.
like at Embry-Riddle, so I was interested in some of their various clubs and teams. Like other people have mentioned the Lunar X Prize and the mining competition and things like that. They had that there, and I looked at it and like, okay, so it's an excavator for the moon. I mean, that's neat, but I don't get it. I don't get why everyone's so excited about it. And then like I saw the Formula SAE. I'm like, oh, cool, race cars. I like race cars. But it just seemed like it was kind of already an in group, and I just felt like I didn't really belong, and I didn't know anything that I could really use to contribute. And it's an aviation school, so like knowing about the RC stuff and a little bit of aircraft design, I was not unique there. Everyone there was an airplane nerd. So,
Right.
I mean, it meant I had friends. We'd go out and fly like foam airplanes in the tennis courts at night because they had good lighting. So we'd go and like chuck little aerobatic foamies around, and I'd go barely. I'd almost lose my glider up above the dorms, but it had a little orange light in the front to indicate that it was powered on, and I could just see that. So I'd go like scoot my glider around, and of course the parking lots were hot from the day, and the air was cool at night, so there were thermals for days.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean it was fun, but yeah, I struggled to get involved with the clubs seriously outside of the RC one. But again, I regret that now because you know what they had over in the Mechie lab? They had a CNC mill. They had a lathe.
Yep.
And they had laser cutters and bigger 3D printers and a bunch of stuff. But I think I wandered in there once. And I'm like, hey, how do I learn how to do this? And they kind of just dismissed me and didn't really give me the time of day. And that was really discouraging. So I didn't look into it too much more. So yeah, anyway, so Katie and I are 3D printing out of our dorm. And then she also left college at about the same time for similar reasons, just struggling in classes and didn't want to throw money at it. I figured we'd try something else. So P3D is happening. It moves to our apartment. It grows to 4 3D printers, and we've actually got a pretty good flow going on. I'm sure I drove our roommate absolutely insane with the stepper motor noises all night, but we kept 4 of them fed all the time, and that was kind of like our intro to job shopping and dealing with customers and talking about like DFM and figuring out how to sell them on sell the customer on compromises to either help meet their price goal or meet the quality that they're expecting or the time and like that was actually a great experience and pretty low risk because like what's a kilogram of plastic cost? $25. I broke an end mill today that was many times that, and these days that's no sweat, but back then, man, that was a lot of money. Like 25 kilograms for a spool of plastic, or $25 for a spool of plastic. Like, oh man, how are we ever going to afford that? We got to sell every gram of that. But eventually, it kind of took off, and I was finding that Katie was really running things out of our apartment while I'd go to my job at the hobby shop, and eventually, I kind of just said, forget all of that. People are awful because everyone would come to me because I guess I was the more helpful one there. And also I felt bad charging people money. So they'd come in and I like solder something for them. It's just like, yeah, whatever. Just, go buy something else. I'm not going to nickel and dime you, even though it was, shop's policy was like X dollars for soldering. It's like, I'm the one doing this. And people would actually tip me, which was nice. I'm like, okay, I can work with this deal.
Right.
But I eventually left the hobby shop. We're 3D printing full time. I don't know, we just kind of sustained like that for a while, but it was a struggle. And then we were looking for more business, and we heard of this thing called Maker Faire. So, Maker Faire, for those who are not familiar, I imagine most people listening to this probably are, but it's more or less a kind of World's Fair for people who it's like a big old convention for people who sew things and laser cut things and 3D print things and build big fiery contraptions and do art and make sculptures and you name it. If someone has created it with their hands or with tools, it can probably be found at Maker Faire. So we're like, oh, hey, these sound like either our people that we can at least get to know or some potential customers. Let's go and sign up to exhibit at Maker Faire. So we did that. And that was probably the single best decision that we ever made. Not that we got a lot of business out of it, although we did manage to 3D print a 4.5 foot tall Saturn V through the Maker Faire weekend, and someone paid us $200 for it, which I was thrilled about. We just had a demo print going, and we maxed out the speed on we had our CME-CNC Rostock Max V2, and we had the thing cranking at like 150 millimeters a second to just try and get this huge rocket done during the weekend. But I had a heater cartridge burn up partway through the show, so I'm like live I like pause the print, and I'm like replacing a heater cartridge live with the printer fired up because it couldn't resume easily. And then I accidentally grounded out the tip of the soldering iron and like blew a fuse in the board. And oh man, the recovery efforts to save that were gargantuan.
Oh my goodness.
But it worked. And then, so the show was Saturday and Sunday, and Saturday night, some guy came over. He had a big tensile testing machine across the way from us. So we'd hear a big bang about every 5 minutes when he snapped a seatbelt or something. And come to find out, he was a member of this place called Familab, which is a hackerspace in Longwood, Florida. And he's like, hey, we've got an after party. You should come check it out. Seems like you guys are 3D printing. You might be interested in the hackerspace. I didn't really know what a hackerspace was. And because I was trying to fix that heater cartridge until late into the night, I never went to the after party. Then like a month later, I'm like, oh, hey, there's that place. We should check it out. And drove from the East Coast of Florida, like an hour towards Orlando, and went to the open house. And we were there until 4 a.m.
Wow.
The reason we were there till 4 a.m., so it's actually kind of funny. So Familab is not Family Lab. It's actually anything but. It can be quite NSFW at certain times. But it's 4 a.m. iLab, because in 2009, putting I in front of everything was trendy. And because you always end up there until 4 a.m. working on your projects. So we went to the open house, and we looked around. Okay, there's like a photography darkroom. That's kind of cool. There's some 3D printers. There's an Epilogue laser cutter, which had my attention. I knew of laser cutters, but had never used one. There's like a welding area. There's a broken CNC router. There's a biohacking lab, which is kind of cool and still blows my mind to this day. And like we're just kind of walking around, and then I see it. There's a Bridgeport. I didn't know it was called that, but it was a big thing, and it was cool.
Right.
And I had taken up a mild interest in building a battle bot somewhere in between high school and I guess visiting the hackerspace. I'd been toying with it. I had done some CAD models that were terrible. I had tried to cut something up and with my jigsaw and my drill press, and it didn't really work. But there was a hackerspace and it had a Bridgeport. So Anyway, we joined, and I kind of just worked my way around. Everything was sort of oriented in a big old circle. So I was already a 3D printer guru. I taught other people how to use the printers there. They were appreciative. By the way, this is a 501c3 nonprofit community-run hackerspace. So nobody works there. It's all members. Everything is volunteer. You break it, you should fix it. leave the space better than you found it, that kind of deal, which I think is actually a great structure for that if you're the sort of person like me. Some people want a business incubator or they want a fab lab where they just pay for access to tools. But this place was really more about the community, and the tools were there to just facilitate making of cool stuff by this awesome community. So yeah, laser cutter, went and taught myself to weld because everyone there was scared of the welders. I'm like, oh, how bad can it be? And okay, so hot steel is hot. It will go through your shoe. It will go through your sock, and it will try to go through your skin. But I learned that so that other people didn't have to.
Did you give yourself a sunburn too, forgetting to put on your jacket?
A couple times, and then I learned that welding jackets are great.
Yeah, you're like, oh yeah, UV is there. I forgot.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't a complete dummy. I knew that, like, okay, a hood and gloves are a good idea. But I figured out quickly that, long sleeve shirt or like a proper welding jacket go a long way. So did some flux core first, and then we eventually got like a real MIG welder there, and I learned how to MIG with gas, which is actually easier than flux core that I'd been doing. So I was a happy camper. And then they eventually got a TIG welder, and I taught myself to do both AC and DC TIG, and I've done aluminum and titanium and stuff now. So I'm not up there with Jody from Weldmonger, but I can at least hold my own and stick some stuff together when I need to. And then, okay, so I can weld. There's a CNC router. It's broken. No one knows how to use it. So I figured I'd rectify that. And many hours of troubleshooting. I think it was running a Linux CNC at first, and then someone put some other board in it trying to run Mach 3, and it was awful, and the spindle needed bearings, and it's like the whole thing is literally made out of 80/20 extrusion and MDF. And it's not running on linear guides or even V-rail. It's like angle iron that somebody with a grinder ground a V on and put a couple of metal rollers on either side. Like, it is a sketchy router. But for wood, apparently it was good enough. So right. It was mostly electronic issues I had to fight. Like, mechanically, it's not a rigid machine, but it was forgiving because if you crashed it, it just twists out of the way and you put it back. And if you break it, you just put some wood glue in, put a clamp on it, and it's good to go the next morning.
Oh my goodness.
Which is exactly what you want in a hackerspace. When you have inexperienced people coming in, getting 30 minutes of training, and then just going off to the races with the machine. Right. And that's the whole point of the space. Like, nobody here is a professional. So everyone's just kind of learning as they go, and you just have to be one step ahead of everybody else, and now you're the de facto teacher. So yeah, learned the CNC router. I had already done the 3D printer, so I knew what CNC was. The router was a little different than what I was used to, but it's still G-code, it's still coordinates. It made sense. And then, kind of the last thing left was the metal shop. And by this point, a lathe had been acquired from an auction, not hooked up. Bridgeport, not hooked up. Harbor Freight mini lathe and like one of those Sieg X2 mini mills. They're there, they're hooked up. People used them as drill presses and whatnot. And there was also this other thing in the corner. It was a 1993 Haas VF1 that I guess a shop in the area had donated like 3 years prior in horrid condition with alarms out the wazoo, covered in wood chips. It wasn't usable at the time. So just like set that aside for 5 minutes from now. I wanted to build that BattleBot. So my uncle had a wedding, and I needed to travel out of country. And I spent a lot of time just sitting on an airplane or like in the hotel room on my own, just waiting until whatever the next event was. And like, I knew about this hackerspace. I knew they had a metal shop. I'd kind of done my rounds up to that point. So like, shoot, I need to figure out how to machine things. And like any good Insta machinist would do, I went to YouTube and I found Tubal Cain, or Mr. Pete 222. We are all used to listening to him talk very slowly, and he has so many videos on so many things, and he wasn't really my style, but hey, he had some machining into stuff, and when you search for like how to use a milling machine, he pops up. So this is probably circa 2015. So the Saunders and the Grimsmo were not like, they were just kind of getting started. Like, their channels were getting bigger, but they were not what they are now. So I watched all of Mr. Pete's videos, and I saw like the MIT, they've got like their 9-hour series on, I think they call it like open source machine tools, on how to use a mill and how to use a lathe and how to use a couple of other things. And I watched all of those. And after watching those, I think I found A-Bomb, I watched some A-bomb videos, and by the time I'd been through those 3 channels pretty thoroughly, I'm like, okay, I know how to do this. And I proceeded to make some horrible noises on the Harbor Freight mini lathe. I thought that one would be better because it was smaller and less scary, but I didn't realize just how bad it was. Like, what even is rigidity? I didn't know how to grind tools because A-bomb hadn't released that video yet. So I'm just like shoving probably dull, and like actually I know it was bad geometry, high speed steel into my aluminum and steel, and like it was making chips, but it wasn't right. So I just kind of brute forced it for a while. ClickSpring had some sweet videos. I was obsessed with watching ClickSpring for a while, and he had one of those fire pistons that he actually did a pretty thorough series on and released the drawings for. I tried making one of those. It didn't work. I blew out the bore because my drill walked and drilled way oversized, and I got a lot of chatter on the actual piston, and my O-ring didn't fit right. But anyway, like you can see, I was making some progress towards machining things that fit together.
Right.
And yeah, started actually building that BattleBot. I built a little 3-pound one and took it to compete. There's actually a pretty decent. Okay, so first of all, BattleBots is a copyrighted. That's the show. That's on previously Comedy Central, and then ABC, and I think Discovery's had it for the past handful of years. So I think the generic term is combat robotics. I was building my combat robot, did a 3-pound, and that actually worked out pretty well. It got absolutely destroyed 3 times, but I brought spare parts. So on one of my matches, I was up against someone's 3D printed robot, and it was dense. Like, you put a big block of plastic in there, it's actually hard to rip that apart. But I ate its tire, and it couldn't move, so I won the match, and I was so ecstatic.
What kind of combat robot was it? What was your weapon?
It was just like a horizontal bar spinner.
Okay.
I was like, okay, Tombstone's good. I should build one of those. And I didn't really know how heat treating worked, but like everyone said, okay, you should use S7 tool steel because it won't grenade on you upon impact. I'm like, okay, I'll go have that water jet cut because I learned about the joy of water jet. And I think I had that done by Big Blue Saw, which was like sort of same thing as send cut send. You upload your file, instant quote, they send you a thing. Like, that was easy. I didn't have to interface with any real humans. So I tried heat treating this because it came in annealed. Tried heat treating this weapon bar, I think in the barbecue at our apartment complex. I got charcoal and like a leaf blower, and I just went until it glowed red, and then I dunked it in some water, which was not the right procedure. And then I like took it out in the parking lot and ran it into some other block of metal I had around, and it didn't explode. So I'm like, cool, all right, BattleBot.
Good enough.
Yep. Yeah, iterate a few times, make some parts, start to gain some confidence, start to make some parts that actually fit together. And then once I don't want to say I was bored of the Bridgeport and the lathe, but I had tried everything else in that hackerspace except the big CNC mill. Like, all right, that's next. And one of the guys in town, or at the hackerspace, had gone to a community college in town and took their basic machining course. He learned just enough to kind of get us all up and running at the space and at least know what it should do. So he gave me like 2 hours of instruction on it and then kind of just said, okay, you're on your own. Very first thing I did was plunge a perfectly good end mill straight through my part.
Oh no.
It was a Harbor Freight high-speed steel end mill though, so that was what, like $1?
Okay.
It went from a flat end mill to looking like a ball end mill. And that was the time I learned about height offsets. So with that out of the way, progress after that was quick. I cut out CNC out of a plate. And then I cut like a nut, no threads, just like a nut shape with a round boss on one side and a hex on the other and the ID board out. Like, okay, that's kind of cool. And I went and downloaded Fusion 360 because I guess it wasn't new at the time, but it was gaining popularity. And the only other option was to use like Inventor Student Edition, which I had for a little bit longer, but I knew it was expiring soon. And I didn't even know about HSM work, so I'm like, okay, I've got Inventor, but it doesn't make me CAM. Although I now know I could have just gone and grabbed
HSM Express
or something. Yeah. I mean, it would have been fine for what I needed. But hey, Fusion was new. Initially, I squawked at the data panel, like, why can't I have real files? And I didn't like how joints worked compared to the like constraints and mates in Inventor, but I figured it all out. I got over the difference. Like, why can't Autodesk just make 2 things
the
the
same.
same. I figured Fusion was just an evolution of Inventor, but now, of course, I know it was a parallel project that they actually bought off someone else, and it's a cohesive thing now. But back in the day, 6 years ago, it was a little bit hit and miss.
Well, even Cam wasn't like part of it for a while. It was Cam 360, and
Yeah,
then
that's
they
true.
like buttoned it all up finally. And
I think you can, if you dig around in Fusion, you can still find the folders that are named Cam 360, just legacy stuff still in there.
Because I remember starting it, like I downloaded it, looked at it when it was very early on, and at that point I was using HSMWorks a little bit at school, and man, I was like, nope, this is too far botched together right now. I'll check back in a couple of years.
Yeah, it's made leaps and bounds of progress and is pretty awesome right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so skip forward a bit. So making robots, making some more precision parts, and somewhere in here we had kind of gotten ourselves in a bad situation, not really through any faults of our own, but basically with both Katie and I, our families were just going through some stuff, and we were kind of on our own. They were dealing with their own things. We didn't really have any direct support. So we're, college dropouts running a 3D printing business out of our apartment, and just not much of a support lifeline to call on. So at a certain point, we actually ended up effectively homeless. Not like living under a bridge, but basically couch surfing with friends from the hackerspace until we could figure something out. Just because 3D printing could not pay, like once our roommate moved out because he was still at college, and we moved a little bit closer to be near the hackerspace, since that's where we were spending a lot of our time anymore. Yeah, we just couldn't afford rent in Central Florida is expensive, especially when you're just 3D printing plastic trinkets and have no idea what you're doing. So yeah, couch surf for a little bit, like a week or two while we figured things out. And I found this place in town that was looking for somebody to help out. They basically buy up auction lots of PCB fab machines, so pick and place and reflow ovens and automated optical inspection and things of that ilk. So they hired me on pretty much as a technician since I had some CNC familiarity. And I spent like a year fixing pick and place machines and scrubbing the paint and like inspecting boards after machines had been in a flood, and like basically bringing stuff back from the dead. And that was kind of nice. It paid the bills, and it kind of got us back on our feet. We were able to actually get in a real apartment nearby and get some savings in the bank and stuff. And about the time I got that job, I started taking on some machining work because, hey, I was okay at it, and we were kind of desperate for money. So what the heck? Why not? And because it was a nonprofit hackerspace, there wasn't really any rule that said that you couldn't run a business out of it, but it was also just kind of an unspoken thing that you didn't monopolize equipment, or like you at least gave back what you got out of it. So, and I'd already been doing this a little bit, but I was just teaching classes. I'd charge $10 a head, and I'd teach a machining 101 class. Not coming from an expert perspective, but like, hey, here's how you don't get hurt on the lathe and the milling machine, and make some round stuff, go and run the face mill across some aluminum stock, throw some chips across the shop, put a big smile on everyone's face. I had been doing that it'd probably been a year since I got started, so I felt comfortable teaching a like raw basics level class. And I taught how to use the CNC router, and I did the laser training, and I also repaired most of the equipment in there. Whenever something would break, like I said, we were 3D printing stuff, and I was, for a while, like I had nowhere else to be. So I would just spend all my time at the lab and, fix up the laser, fix the bridge port, rebuild the CNC router again. And, I brought the Haas VF1 back from the dead several times. Someone had previously done that for me. The machine was totally broken when we got it, and about the time I joined, they made some progress on it and got some of the big stuff taken care of. They pulled the enclosure apart, they cleaned everything real well. That fixed a lot of stuff. But then once I started actually using it, it's like, another drive fault, and then it turned out the brake resistors were toast. And then lube wasn't getting to the ball screws, so I fixed that. And then the spindle was noisy, so I pulled it apart because I didn't know any better. I'm like, hey, let me just take apart the spindle and try to rebuild it. Actually worked. I figured it out. Thanks, Practical Machinist. Yeah, threw some fresh bearings in there, and it actually runs great to this day. The
Cool.
taper is still kind of beat up, but the bearings are good. sounds great. It's actually quieter than a couple of my machines in my shop today. Okay, so this VF1, it's the spaceship machine. It's the Tupperware era
Oh,
machine.
it's plastic fantastic.
Yes, it is. The same one that Brad Souther had.
Uh-huh.
Actually, I ran into him a couple years later at Blade Show. He and John Grimsmo were sharing a booth, and I stopped by and said hi, and we chatted old school Haas for a little bit, and he gave me a couple tips for getting the most out of it. One of them, which was awesome, was I think you do it's either M77 or M79. I think it's M76 and M77. Basically, it turns off the display. It stops updating the display, and that frees up processor cycles to run code more smoothly. So you can't watch your distance to go. But if you press feed hold, it does update. So you can like feed hold before you get to the top of your part, and then like make sure that it looks about right, and then hit go again. But like the screen doesn't update or anything. But it changed if I wanted to throw 3D surfacing into it or do an adaptive toolpath, it made it run a million times better. So thanks, Brad. If you were the one who gave me that tip, I appreciate it. But
that's so funny.
I kind of just dove into the machining thing, and I realized I really liked it. I was kind of okay at it. I was not the best by any means. I'm not, and I will never be. But I was good enough that I could start to do some basic paid work, and then I had this real job supporting me on the side. So I'd basically do my 8 hours from 8 to 4 over fixing circuit board fab machines. Actually, we got a CMM in there once that I didn't really know what it was, but I looked it up and was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And it was broken. Turns out it was just a pinched Ethernet cable. So they bought it for a steal, and someone else got it for a steal. In retrospect, I should have asked if I could have had it. It's like, oh, sorry, it's broken. Can I have this as a project?
Right. Yeah, exactly. But, I'll take this junk off your hands, guys. It's okay.
Yeah. But yeah, back at the circuit board place, like they got a Zortrax 3D printer because they were always asking me like, hey, we've got this broken part, but we can't buy them. Like, do you know how we can make this? And they kind of knew my skill set. So I was like, okay, buy me the best 3D printer I know of, and we can just 3D print a lot of these parts. So we did that, and I had some stuff laser cut as appropriate. And I kind of let them know in a very subtle way that I may have access to some machine tools. So for what required it, I even made some machine components for them after hours. So they were paying me for my 8 hours, and they were paying me a bit more at a better rate in the evenings. But eventually, I kind of got to the point where my day job was getting in the way of the machining business because I wouldn't say it was a runaway success, but we were actually doing all right. We had a pretty good amount of business. We were doing 3D printing and machining for a good while. So we had the dual income from that. And I was just burning the candle at both ends. There's some foreshadowing. I still am, but not for someone else at least.
Right.
So I ended up leaving that job, and I was just going to make the jump myself while Katie still had a job somewhere else, and we just see how it went. If nothing else, Katie could still pay rent at home, and I was working out of the hackerspace, so I didn't have like massive shop overhead using somebody else's equipment. Although, it was my baby. I fixed it. I put lots of money in parts and tooling and stuff into it. I think I put a sign on it that said, like, don't touch my CNC or something like that. Because I was realistically the only one running it. Nobody else really had a need. So I did get to monopolize that machine. And in exchange, I taught a Machine Shop 101 class once a month and fixed everything, and people were cool with it. So that was 2017. That was when I went full time. 30 days later, Katie got laid off because the company she was working for could not afford to pay her, and because they sucked at marketing and never actually they were like a spare parts place for, industrial surplus. But they had this huge warehouse, and none of their stuff ever went online, so nobody could find it. So surprised they never sold anything. So yeah, they laid her off, and we kind of hit a divide. We're like, okay, or a fork in the road rather. I can go either ask for my job back or find something else, or Katie can go and try to find something else, or we can just say, I think it was in style it was earlier. I was going to say maybe it was in style to say YOLO, but no, that was like 2012 or something. Yes, screw it. We're going ahead. We're going to just do this machining thing full time and do the 3D printing thing as well, and just see how it goes. So we did that option. because so right now I'm 25. So I, left college at 19. We really started the business about then. We were like 20, 21 when I quit to go full time. So like I didn't have much at stake. There are no children. There is no house. I was driving a 1999 Volkswagen that puked oil all over the place about once every 6 months. I had to replace the O-ring again in the oil cooler. Like we were recently homeless and only, just housing solid for about a year. So it's like, yeah, what do we have to lose? And we just kind of took the gamble, which I don't know if I would do that again. I wouldn't do it today for sure. But I guess at the time, I mean, it was kind of fun and we thought we could do it. And I mean, I'll be honest, it's been a struggle. Because we started, I mean, if we were couch surfing and stuff, we started with like nothing.
Right.
And then I didn't get paid that much to go and scrub the paint clean on these circuit board fab machines. And whatever I did earn from that and what I did earn from machining stuff in the evenings went straight back into buying tooling. I wanted vices. I wanted more tool holders. I wanted end mills. And like, this business is like $1,000 is a drop in the bucket. It just, seems like you spend that every day.
Yeah.
Everything costs thousands of dollars. So like we're just shoving everything back into the business and there's not much in savings, but we're like, yeah, let's just do it. If we have more time and both of us on it, then surely we can find a way. And yeah, we did. So for about another year and a half till mid 2018, we're working out of the hackerspace. So low overhead. I started getting a lot better at machining, set up some sweet processes and everything. I bought like a flex arm so I could tap things because the VF1 didn't have rigid tapping. And I got a job that needed like 300 M3 by like 4mm deep holes tapped. I'm like, nope, not doing that.
Ooh.
So bought a flex arm. That was a stretch. I'm like, can I finance this? It's flex arm's like $3,000, but I'm like, can I pay you guys like half now and half in like a month or two when I get paid for this job?
Right.
And they were very gracious and were able to work with us and help us get the tool we needed, which really like for a job that actually paid pretty well for the time. So we added a flex arm. I got some Glacern vices, which were absolutely the shit to me at the time. Like, whoa, it's got flat sides. I can tip it up on its side and it's not a rusty Kurt.
Right.
Like the vices that were at the hackerspace. And I bought like my first Mari tool holders and we were balling. It was great. And it started to get to the point where the space felt a little bit cramped. Like we're sharing this, it's a 100-member hackerspace. Not everyone's there all the time. There's probably like 30 core active members. And of those, like 5 are active in the machine shop and most on like the manual tools. But my little desk at front where I did my cam and like I had the serial connection that went up the wall and then over a 2x4 that it was duct taped to, and then that plugged into the VF1 with my copy of Simco from HSM Works that probably should have expired long before it did. I don't know. The Simco edit had the best DNC software I could find at the time. Mm-hmm. It just worked more reliably, especially on that old machine. Yeah, I had my desk there. I had my other workbench with my flex arm and all my other worldly possessions stuffed under it. Like, this is actually getting to be a nuisance because I've got to take everything out every morning. I've got to go and do my work. And then people stop by and they say hi. And they're like, hey, Nick, can you help me with this? Hey, Nick, hey, the laser's broken. Can you go fix that? And someone makes a stink because they had like planned to come in and cut their Etsy stuff on it, or they had some art project they were really hoping to do and the laser's down. It's like, fine, I'll go change the belt again. Stop over tensioning it. Stop crashing the laser into things that should not be
in a laser
high.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. It just, between distractions and being space limited and also not being able to add any other machines. Like I was stuck with what existed there. I couldn't really bring in my own machinery and just plop it on the floor and say, hey guys, I'm using this space now. It's just not really something you do in a community workshop.
Right.
So we started looking for a space and nothing really was in our price range. But just kind of thinking ahead, trying to make preparatory purchases, as it were, I emailed all the machine shops in the area and was like, hey, first of all, do you have any like prototype work, one-offs and things like that you don't have time for? I might be able to do them. And likewise, I've got some production jobs that people ask me for that I don't have the capacity for. Like, can we maybe set up a symbiotic relationship there? And while I've got you here, do you have any machines you're selling? And eventually so most of it got ghosted, whatever. I understand people are busy and don't have time for somebody like me, especially if it's a big shop. But this one shop up in Sanford, which was like a half hour away, had they did mostly aerospace stuff. They were a machine shop full of pretty much nothing but Hercos. And they're all doing like conversational programming on pallets upon pallets of aerospace parts. They invited me to come up for a tour. And of course, I've never seen a real machine shop before. My concept of what a machine shop is purely what I had developed up to that point. I didn't know how it worked. I didn't know how to quote jobs. I didn't know what machines existed other than this VF1. And, I'd, of course, gone to the Haas website and looked around and like, oh, I can't afford any of that. But I knew I kind of wanted a CNC lathe because I had the CNC mill, but going over to the manual lathe was sort of limiting, and it kind of got tedious on more than one or two parts. And this shop up in Sanford was like, hey, come take a tour. And also, we might have a lathe you want. I'm like, okay, I probably can't afford it, but I'll take a look. And they showed me this Kia lathe. So they're now Hyundai Wea, I think is the name they're selling under. But Jonathan, Split 141, has a lathe very similar to this one. They showed me this Kia SKT 21 LMS. More letters than I'd ever seen on any machine. And they're like, yeah, we have this for sale. We're moving in a month. It's broken, and we don't want to pay rigging on it. You could have it for, I think initially he told me $5,000. And like, oh, that's kind of a great deal. Even if it is broken, I'll just like put it somewhere and I'll try to fix it. And then I got a rigging quote, which was half that price again. And I realized how expensive it was to move machines. So we sat on it for a while because that was a lot of money at the time. That was like everything we had to get to buy that lathe and move it somewhere. And we didn't have a somewhere yet. So we're like desperately trying to figure out how to make this happen because I wanted that lathe. And we had a buddy who had a warehouse on the other side of town. And he said he didn't have any real power there, but he was going to get 3-phase like the next year. So I'm like, cool, we'll just set up shop there. 10,000 square foot warehouse, lots of room to grow. It's shared by a few people, but it's mostly storage right now. About a week before they moved, the guy reached out to me again. He's like, hey, do you want this lathe? We'll do it for $4,000. We really need it out of here. So I'm like, oh, I was going to take it at the previous price, but yes, sold. So wrote him a check, got that lathe. Called the riggers, got the grumpiest, angriest guy around, but man, he was actually cheaper than our other quotes, so that's what we did. And he carted it off to the other side of town, and it sat there for a year because that 3-phase power never came.
Oh, no.
Never make business decisions based on promises from other people.
Yep.
So, all right. So now we're in a precarious position because I was hoping to find a shop that we could go and like get a couple of cheap machines and get started on. I was eyeing Tormach at this point. It's like, okay, I could get like an 1100 and I could either, we've got this Kia lathe, so we've got a mill and a lathe. And that's really all you need to get started. But without power, it didn't do us any good. So I sat on it and I sat on it. And eventually we found our current shop on Craigslist. And it was really close to us. It's a really nice looking building. It had 3-phase power, unlike the 6 other places we had looked at that said they had 3-phase power, and they did not. Everything else was like 5,000 square feet or bigger, and we couldn't afford that. Everything else with 3-phase power, that is. So, like, okay, we've got this place. It has 3-phase power. It's 1,600 square feet. We can afford the rent. Let's do it. But just prior to committing to that, I had this Kia sitting in a warehouse. I didn't know if it worked. I didn't know what was wrong with it. We actually had to drive like an hour away to this repair shop that had the B-axis servo drive and B-axis motor, which doesn't bode well for the machine being anywhere near functional. But that shop couldn't do anything with it because they're a Herco shop. They specialize in the older Herco controls, and they're like, yeah, this is FANUC. We can't fix this. So we've got a machine with its guts in the back of my car in a warehouse with no power. So I like called up my buddy who had a truck, and we went to Sunbelt and we rented a 3-phase generator because I learned that was a thing. So for like $400, I rented this generator for 2 or 3 days and went and bought some like 6-gauge wire and ran it 100 feet back into the warehouse and wired up this lathe. And there were so many alarms.
Every alarm.
We spent 12-hour days for the first 2 days just trying to get the thing to move. And I had never used Fanuc before. I'd only used the old Haas control. So imagine my confusion as a newbie machinist who didn't even know how a lathe was supposed to work. And yeah, it was crazy. But just per chance, I had gotten in touch with a wire EDM shop in the area because I had some parts that needed EDM for some jobs I was doing. I'm like, I don't have EDM, but I'm sure someone does. There's like one single shop in Orlando that does it, but it was 5 minutes away from the hackerspace. So I drove up there, said hi to the guy. He introduced me. Really nice guy. Martin at Accurate Tool Manufacturers. He's a tool maker. He's got surface grinders. He has lathes. He has wire EDM. Doesn't really have mills. He likes pretty much if it can't come off a lathe, his EDM is making it because he doesn't like mills. Although at the time he had a couple of older Miltronics machines. So yeah, I meet him and I notice he has a Kia SKT21 LMS.
No way.
Turns out that machine was 0133 serial number and my machine was 0134. They came on the same truck.
What?
On the same boat. And were the same year and like identical options. Actually, my machine was supposed to be his, but the guy who bought my machine needed theirs faster. And I guess Martin wasn't really in a hurry. And there was some holdup. Like I don't know if there was an issue with the machine or like some option came on one and they forgot to install it on the other. Anyway, they swapped machines at the last minute. So I have a sister machine and I'm like, hey, can you do me a favor? Are you willing to drive out to like 45 minutes away on the other side of town and look at this lathe and tell me, like, just help me get it started or tell me what might be wrong with it? And he gets out there and sees it like powered up with the generator. And I can tell he was rolling his eyes already. He's like, oh man, this is never, ever going to work. And like, he shows me the way it's supposed to work. And I was like, okay, you press standby and then you press jog and zero return. And finally, this machine springs to life. It was like me and my other buddy had been diving through the electronics manual. We found out that like the part catcher limit switch was fried or shorted or something. So we just jumpered it in the back. And we found out that the servo drive was fried. So I pulled it apart and it had just blown up a trace on the back of it, but very cleanly. So I simply put a big old gob of solder and some extra, like some really heavy gauge wire to bridge it. And that cleared the alarm. Did not expect that to work. I thought I was going to pay Fanuc like $2,000.
Right.
Which I couldn't afford at the time. But no, I managed to repair the servo drive with a super janky repair. And I really thoroughly checked it. And the only issue was like the main power bus trace was exploded. So slotted it back in. Lathe came up, no alarms. Martin came over. We tried homing the machine and it wouldn't home. Because when you tried to home it, the B-axis, the subspindle linear axis, would jump at like full rapid in a random direction, a random distance. And because the B-axis wasn't at home, that interlock and the ladder wasn't triggered, so you couldn't actually home the X and Y or run the spindle or put it in MDI or the MEM or anything. But yeah, the B-axis would just jump, which scared the crap out of us.
Yeah, I bet.
And it wasn't consistent. Like what I would do is I'd like e-stop the machine. I had the way covers off. So I'd like turn the ball screw by hand to center up the sub spindle while we're testing this, center it up. And then we'd try powering it up again and just see what it did. It would go like a random direction. But at least we knew the lathe, it powered up and something moved. And I couldn't index the tool changer, but like the hydraulics worked and there weren't any huge leaks I could find. So I was like, okay, cool. The lathe powers up. I'm confident enough to sign the lease on our space. And once I have like real three-phase power, I've got all the time in the world to troubleshoot this, except I don't because I don't have a working machine and I'll have rent to pay. But as I have heard said on this podcast many times, build my parachute on the way down. I'm an expert parachute builder.
Sure sounds like it.
Yeah. Actually, that guy who was snapping the seatbelt straps at Maker Faire, works for a parachute company over in DeLand, which is about 45 minutes away, is like the single biggest skydiving location in the U.S. The most people die there, but it's only because they do the most jumps. It's not that sketchy.
Right. Statistically, per jump, it's not the most. It's just the most.
It's probably pretty good, but they just do so many more jumps than everybody else that about once or twice a year you hear a tragic story, and it kind of sucks. And also the pilots will definitely race the skydivers back down. You'll see them turn and dive and shoot for the runway, and they'll try to beat the skydivers to the ground.
Wow.
Which is bonkers.
Super safe.
But the pilots also wear chutes. So if they break the plane, they just jump out too.
Oh my goodness. Oh, jeez.
Yeah, they're a special breed. I have
Indeed.
heard so many interesting stories. I always look forward to story time from him. But yeah, so around this time, so we sign our lease on our shop. Like, okay, we got a building, but everything's expensive to move. And we're out of money at this point. We're back to like zero. But we got to pay rigging fees. I've got to get like basic shop stuff set up. I've got to do power. I've got to buy some tooling. I might need to repair the Kia. So what we actually did is I was listening to another podcast I frequent, Stuff You Should Know, and they have a Kiva team, which is basically like small loans for entrepreneurs, usually in other countries, but they do have like a US branch. So there's 0% interest. The term is usually like 1 or 2 years, and it's usually less than $10,000. And it's just like to help get businesses started. Jane in South Africa wants to start making dresses for her community, but she needs some money to buy supplies. So she'll ask for like $3,000 to go and get the stuff for that, get a sewing machine and some dressmaking stuff. But the deal is they don't just give you the money. It's crowdfunded. It's like Kickstarter, but you pay it back.
Interesting.
So you initially have to get a certain number of like your friends and family to loan you a small amount towards it, basically like social credit. If your friends and family won't back you, then it's unlikely that anyone else is going to get their money repaid. But if your friends and family believe in you and they trust that you're good for it and that you've got something, then they open it up to the public. So I think we asked for $7,000 on a 2-year repayment, and that was the amount that we figured out was enough to move both of our machines, because another shop in the area was throwing out a 1992 VF3, also broken. So I have now 2 broken machines moving to the shop. I needed to pay rigging for both of them and do all the tooling up and whatever repairs and stuff. So $7,000 was like the number to get us moved in and get us through the first month or two till we started making money. And I could still work out of the lab. Like, it wasn't like we were at zero production, but now I'm in 2 different places with my tools moving back and forth, and it was a pain. But yeah, we got some money from friends and family who were very generous. And then like some very generous anonymous strangers on the internet sent us some money. And yeah, it got us by. It helped us get moved in. I mean, just by the skin of our teeth.
How cool.
We paid that back in like 9 or 10 months, I think. It was well before the term everyone got their money back. But that was a very interesting option because we had no business credit history. I had, because I was so young and I didn't believe in credit cards until someone explained to me the importance of having like credit history. I had no credit history, no credit card, nothing. I had cash and nothing else.
Right.
So that was a good way to get us a small loan to get us started and kind of get us established. So we got moved into the shop. And now we've got our Kia, we've got a VF3, we got 1,600 square feet, and I just went at it. VF3, luckily, was exactly the same generation as the machine I had been using at the hackerspace. I already knew it inside and out. It was the same electronics.
Right.
I already knew I'd have to replace the CRT because it was all orange. And like one of the servo drives messed up and it wouldn't tool change, but I'd already had issues with that on the other machine. So limit switches, and then pulled the tool changer apart. The tool release piston just needed an O-ring. They threw this machine out because of an O-ring on the tool release piston and on the spindle orient. But I guess they called out the local Hostex for a couple days, and they couldn't figure out why this machine wouldn't tool change. But they were only used to the modern machines that have the electronic orientation with the encoder, not the old shot pin mechanical orientation. And they didn't think to check if those limit switches were registering and if the O-rings were sealing and if it was actually seating in the orientation ring. So I fixed that machine for like $20 in parts. And then I spent the next year and a half continuously scraping off all the dirt and grime on that poor machine.
Ooh.
It looked way better when I was done with it than when I got it. Same with the Kia, was just a mess. It was so dirty. There was I think there were sunflower seeds in the part catcher. which is why the limit switches had corroded and stopped working. Either that or they had some seriously awful coolant reacting with like paint or like insulation foam or something weird like that.
So very possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard stories about that shop from my other friend with the matching Kia. But
This was what, 2018?
This would have been late 2018, yeah.
Okay.
And sorry, I realize we've been talking for a while now. This might just be a long one.
That's okay. I got all the time in the world, so.
Cool. I don't get to talk shop until the full complete story often, so this is fun. Okay, so now we're kind of getting into what I'd call modern P3D. We have our own independent shop. We got through all of our like really poor times, and when we made some rookie mistakes, and like really I should have hung on to my day job longer. That's kind of what I realize now, because a few more months would have put enough money in the bank where I at least would have, it wouldn't have been such a stretch to fund some of this stuff. But I was just excited, and I was kind of tired of working for someone else, and just figured I'd jump off. So we got the VF3 working. We had a mill, and then the Kia, the axis drive was bad, and then it was just the encoder on the motor that needed to be replaced. And the windings also had kind of low resistance between the case and the windings. I think some coolant got in there and maybe degraded the insulation. I didn't have a Megger from this century anyway. There was one at the lab, but it was literally from 1930. So I didn't fully trust it, but I could see that it was reading, like it had one of those old dry cell batteries in it that's like 8 inches tall and 4 inches around. I put like a AA in its place, but the Megger that I had access to indicated there was probably a short. My multimeter gave fluctuating readings that indicated that was probably correct. And then the encoder, I hooked up an oscilloscope from the hackerspace to it, and encoder is being flaky. And that's probably why I think what was happening with the B-axis jumping is either the encoder was giving erroneous readings, so it was trying to home itself, and it was seeing that it thought it was moving really quickly in the wrong direction, and or the windings, the drive was trying to apply a lot of current to the windings, but it was just shorting to ground on one or more phases. So it would try, I believe they're basically 3-phase brushless motors. So it would apply a lot of current to it on one set of phases, and it would try to switch to the other phase, and it would short, but then it would try to switch to the next phase, and it would move again. But it was just giving really inconsistent and terrifying results. So my rebuilt drive is in there. I went and I bought a backup on eBay. I got a good deal on a spare identical one, and I put a brand new motor from Fanuc in there. Probably should have sent the other one back for parts, but I had this crazy idea that I'd fix it myself and then keep it for a spare, and it's still sitting in my drawer. So if anyone wants a random Fanuc motor to rebuild and sell on eBay, be my guest. Let me know. Make you a good deal. But I had a functional lathe. It had all kinds of other gremlins. The tool changer had issues. The live tools were super noisy and sloppy. It leaked everywhere. All the buttons on the control were kind of worn off because it's one of those like plastic membrane things. I think coolant exposure just degraded it and it got brittle. So I taped over all of it and put my own labels on, which have now worn off again. So I need to just go buy a new label for it so it doesn't look like my shop is poorly taken care of. But the machine itself was solid. Like once I got my head around the Fanuc control, I figured out how to get programs into it with the like 8 button presses it takes. And I got the serial working right. And I had that VF3, which I was already kind of up to speed with. Like, okay, now we're rocking and rolling. I have a lathe and a mill. I've doubled my effective capacity. My lathe can pretend to be a mill in a pinch. And
so it's live tool, subspindle, no y-axis, right?
Yes. Yeah, live tool, subspindle, no y-axis, so C-axis only, 8-inch chuck. So it's like a Doosan Lynx 200, I think. It's a mid-size lathe, big enough to swing some big parts, not so big that I can't do some small work. I actually kind of like the size. I always lust for a bigger or smaller machine depending on what people send me. I'm like, I have those days where I'm like, I should buy a Swiss. And then other days where it's like, I don't have enough swing for this. I should get a big lathe. Or like at least get a big manual lathe. And then I quickly talk myself out of that because job shopping low quantity stuff on a Swiss sounds awful. And having a gigantic lathe in my relatively tiny shop. I know some guys are working out of their garage. Like Ed Kramer has like 200 square feet or something. I'm ginormous in comparison. But yeah, I just didn't have room for like big machines, nor could I afford them.
Right.
But we got some good work in. We got signed up with Xometry somewhere in here, and they provided a good fallback. They don't always have the best work, but they have something. And when we were poor and our overhead was pretty low, and I would work for anything, like over at the hackerspace, people would just like buy me a pizza to go fix whatever machine was broken. I was so happy to go and fix the router for a pizza.
Right.
Like a Little Caesar's pizza, not even a good pizza.
Well, and like
cardboard with
Xometry,
cheese.
if you're making some money, it's better than literally doing nothing and just sitting around.
Yeah, like Xometry is like the Little Caesars of machining. Like it's work. It's better than nothing. It's like, but it's cardboard with cheese on it.
Right, yeah.
So,
It's food,
yeah,
technically.
when you're hungry, you are very thankful to have it. When you have nothing, it's amazing. But when there are other options, maybe it's not the first thing you go for.
Right. Well,
But
I don't know like when this was that you signed up, but like
I
in the
think we technically
beginning.
signed up with Xometry in 2017.
Okay.
I could look at my account and find out how many years we've been with them. We're like, I don't know, number 1400 something with them. So
Okay.
not like super early, but we've been around a while.
Yeah, I'm not sure when I signed up, but it was probably right around then too. And for a while, it was really good money. Like there was like a year and a half there where I was making a ton of money with them and rarely had to send stuff back. But then it became the Little Caesars.
Yeah, it comes and goes. And also these days, I am a lot more selective on what I take from them. So like before, I was competing for block with holes with all of the other shops with Tormox and whatever that could make a block with holes. These days, my capabilities are somewhat improved. And now I don't take blocks with holes because they don't pay money. I take that stuff that is still there at 8 p.m. on a Friday night that nobody else wanted.
Right.
And I kick it back and I ask for like 4 times as much. And they're like, okay, nobody else wanted it, so fine.
Right.
So I do like a job or two per week for them. And that's good, steady income. I know they're going to pay. I don't have to chase them down like some of my other customers. They're reliable.
So speaking of your capabilities, what is the current layout of your shop? What machines do you have and support equipment and all that?
Sure. Okay. So we had the VF3, we had the Kia, and briefly our EDM guy who didn't like mills pretty much gave me. He had a Miltronics Partner 1, which is like a VF1 sized, similar. It's actually a fiberglass enclosure on that one. Like little tool room mill type thing. It had like a 12 tool umbrella tool changer that was hilariously slow. The whole thing was janky, but it was another spindle. I had space in the shop. So we had our 2 1990s beige boxes on the milling side, both barely hanging on. They had been abused by their previous owners. And we had our Kia lathe, and really that was it. That was what we had in the shop. But 2018 turned out to be a decent year for us. We moved in like August, and then October, November, we got a pretty big job making, I guess it's public now, I think I can talk about it. We made roller coaster headlights for Universal Beijing's Jurassic Coaster, or it's named similar to that. A company in town does like theme park stuff because we're in Orlando where we have Universal and Disney. So they interface with those guys all the time, and they came to us and they're like, hey, do you guys want to make some headlights for this roller coaster? And it was a big job. It was like tenfold bigger than anything we'd ever taken on, way in over our heads. But it paid well, and I got them to give us a decent deposit up front. So, paid for all the material, all the tooling. I bought myself some orange vices because I was really sick of bolt-on jaws. Those were like the bane of my existence. I have like the Pearson Smart Jaws that had the keyhole slot. Those were better, but still not great. But yeah,
Right.
Orange changed things. So we had this big job come in, and basically what that did with the VF3, it was the only thing big enough to run a lot of these parts. They were really big parts, lots of material removal. It did a great job considering its age. But we realized after the first article for those, when they came back and they asked for like 20 plus of them, we didn't have the capacity to meet their lead times. But the job was a decent enough amount of money that we started shopping the used machine market. And we went to a used machine dealer and we're like, hey, what do you guys have for like a mid-size mill, like VF3-ish size that's just newer? I don't want brand new. Our budget is, I think at the time we were like, what can you get us for $40,000? that's not broken, but better. And they're like, well, right now we don't have much, but we do have this VM3. It's a 2006. It has a 12K spindle, which is standard on the VM. It's got probing. I'm like, wait, what probing? I can have probing? Because I'd been edge findering it, and then I got the Heimer, and like everyone else, you get the Heimer, and that is the event of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And then you break a tip, and then you get one of John Saunders' stickers. Yeah, so we got the VM, and it was about 50% more than what our original budget was, but we couldn't turn it down. It was available right then, and we needed it right then. We couldn't really wait because this job, we had already accepted this job saying we could get it done.
Building your parachute on the way down again.
Yeah, exactly. I figured I could find a way. I mean, they gave us some money up front, so we at least had something to show the bank and say, hey, we have some money, and we've got this job, and they're going to pay us some more at the end. So we can't buy a machine. And they're like, I had to first explain to our bank what a milling machine was. And then after we failed to explain that, they're just like, whatever, it's equipment for your business. You'll probably make money. And like our first year incorporated, our revenue was like 35 grand or something, which was absolutely pitiful. But then this next year, it was much, much better than that. So we could at least, again, point to that for the bank and say, hey, we're growing a lot and we have a real shop now, and just had to kind of plead our case. So they sighed. They gave us too high of an interest rate. I didn't know any better, but they gave us the machine loan. We called up the machine dealer. We're like, hey, can we have this? And they shipped it to us. And then I didn't understand that the freight didn't include the rigging costs, so I got dinged again for that. So at this point, I've now become an expert in moving machines around, and I have learned these things. But every first-time machine buyer has to learn that. And like previously, my machine moves were just like local in town, so rigging and trucking were like done by the same company for the same price. Yeah, we got this VM in here and cranked through that job, and that pretty much was like what made the company. We had a modern machine now. I had probing. I had a fast spindle. I wasn't really that worried about it breaking. It was pretty low hours. It was in decent shape. I still had little things to fix. Very first thing I did upon getting the machine was throw a part out of... I was a little bit too overconfident in my Mighty Bite Talon grips, and I was running late nights trying to get this production job done, and I didn't quite seat something all the way. And it just yoinked it right out of the vise, threw it onto the y-axis. And like as I'm going home for the night and leaving Katie to load the machine, while I slept, it slams the y-axis into the back of the machine. And then it tries to move forward again because it didn't fault out for some reason. So now it's smashed the rear, like there's like the way cover attached to the sheet metal that goes over top of the sliding one. Mm-hmm. So it has smashed that in, and then jammed it, and then pulled it back out, and pulled actually the entire rear machine sheet metal in.
No.
Shit, I just ruined our brand new to us machine that I just paid more money than I've ever spent on anything before for.
Right.
I'm still skydiving, and I still got that parachute that I'm working on, so I figured it out. Ordered an $800 weight cover, which really hurt at the time, and drilled holes in places that were not stock, and tapped into the cast iron and got some progressively longer and then ever shortening quarter 20 bolts, and pushed the sheet metal, or pulled the sheet metal back into place, and applied way too much Sikaflex. And hey, it's back up and running. But I did definitely run that machine with a tarp as the rear way cover and some like Home Depot magnets, because I could not afford downtime.
Right.
So I went and I got a tarp and like the big 100-pound pole, like ceramic magnets, put like 6 of those on there. It actually worked really well. It just made like tarpy noises every time it moved the Y. But a few days later, my weight cover showed up. I had to become a sheet metal fabricator and bend this back into place. And without disassembling the entire machine, some of the metal I couldn't like overbend to get it to spring back into its original position, which is why I just added additional screws and progressively tightened them. It's fine. You can't even tell now, but like imagine my horror upon hearing that huge part go thunk, and I had just enough time to go, what was that? And then the ripping and tearing sound started, and like a machine faulted out, and I ran over it, e-stopped it anyway. And yeah. So that was about the worst drama we ever had. we fixed up that machine. It's been amazing ever since. So we're talking about what we got in the shop today. So now we get into present day P3D. We sold about a year ago. We sold our Miltronics machine to a buddy of mine. That's in his garage. I sold it to him for like $800 because I didn't want to give it away, but I couldn't reasonably charge anyone money for that because I got it for free.
Mhm.
I just had to fix it. I have had to fix every machine up until this point in time because it did not work when I got it. And then we sold the Miltronics to make some room for something else. And then we sold the VF3 to make some room for something else. We didn't really know what, but both of those machines had become maintenance nightmares, and I was out of time to wrench on machines. By this point, business has picked up enough where I'm not, like, I don't have time for side projects. The kind of that slider that goes between having more time than money to having more money than time, or at least more stuff to do than time available, has gone to the I will solve this with money
Right.
side. Trying to get out of bootstrapper mode now. So in November of last year, we bought a 4th axis for the VM. And I bought some rock-lock fixturing from 5th axis. And I made myself a poor man's 5-axis machine because I knew we went to EMO in 2019 in Germany. I didn't have a sticker, but I went to the 5th axis booth and I stole several of their stickers and I doubled them up so that I could put my business card on the side of Grimsmo's Kern because that's what everyone was doing. So I joined in a getaway and I think it actually survived the trip. But they were trying to take it off because I was one of the first ones. And they were like, oh, someone just like vandalized this machine. And Marv had to come over and say, leave the stickers. They're important.
Right. John asked for them. This is okay.
Yeah. This was a request from Instagram. Yeah, so we went to EMO and we're machine shopping. We're like, oh man, we could get a 5-axis. Maybe we could get a Haas UMC 750. Maybe we get like a Matsura. I don't know. What's a Makino cost? What do all these things cost? And then we found out, we're like, oh, we can't get a Makino. We can't get a Hurley. Haas. Oh, hey, at EMO, they brought the UMC 500. What's that? And we looked at it and we're like, oh, that's cool. 125,000? That's a lot. We could maybe do it, but probably not because we're still paying off our other machine and so on. It was a good time. We had a good time at EMO. We just needed a vacation because at this point we'd been in our shop for like a year and a half and it was brutal. Just 16-hour days, almost 7 days a week, just not so scheduled to just try and survive. And I hadn't had a break in a long time. But so we went combo Germany vacation plus machine shopping. And just kind of got some ideas. We also ran into Datron there. More on that later. And I don't know, we weren't ready to purchase, but it was a big machine tool show. It was conveniently timed. We figured we'd get the lay of the land, find manufacturers that maybe we didn't know about, make some contacts, which it was very successful from that point of view. I think I almost bumped into some other people, but I was just in a different section of the building. And, everyone was busy talking to people and not like looking at Instagram to see, where everybody was at the time. I wasn't really in with the group. I just was there.
Right.
And I think I talked to like Ed Kramer and was like, oh, hey, I'm over at the Aroa booth. And he's like, oh, I'm over at Kern right now. I'll meet you there later. And then like we both forgot or got distracted and went somewhere else. So missed connections. So we're machine shopping there. And then I got the 4th axis, pretended to be poor man's 5th axis. Between using the angle plate and the rock lock, I could do essentially 3+2 indexing in 90-degree increments. And that really propelled us because now I could take on parts that were not just 3-axis parts, but 4-axis parts with indexing and even things that are like, actually it's not just 90 degrees because since I had the angle plate on the rotary, I could do it in this top like standard orientation. I could then tip it 90 degrees sideways and index the vise or the fixture or whatever about that rock lock plate in 90-degree increments. But the 4th axis could also move infinitely along one axis at a time.
Right.
So it was really like I could do 4+1 stuff, which was amazing. And we made some really cool parts like that I could not have done otherwise. And it made us money and it opened us up to new clientele. And then very quickly we're like, we need a real 5-axis. So we started poking around like March of this year, got in touch with our local Haas outlet. We're like, hey, we saw the UMC 500 a few years ago. Do you guys have one? What's the best you can do on it right now? And so 2020 was the year of COVID and nobody was going to machine tool showrooms. people weren't really buying machines or anything. So our salesman comes back and he's like, hey, have I got the deal for you? Prices have gone up, but we bought this machine in early 2020. So we will sell it to you at 2020 prices plus a showroom discount. And it's a UMC 750 or UMC 500 non-SS, but with a 15K spindle, with probing, with a chip conveyor, high-speed machining. Like it's basically an SS without the faster motors. And I actually don't know hardware-wise what the difference is, but it's the slightly slower one.
Right.
And he made us a killer deal on it. Like basically list price for a base UMC is what we got for one with the 15K and all the options and everything. And that was in stock locally, because otherwise it was supposed to be 6 to 8 weeks. So, of course, that's still a big jump for us. We just kind of wanted to go there and see it and be able to find out if it would fit in our space. But we stewed on it for 2 or 3 days, and we called him back on Monday, and he's like, "Oh, that machine's up Friday." Like,
no.
We were there on like Wednesday. I thought we expressed we were interested. Shoot, that was a good deal. Is there anything you can we do anything? And I tried to like nicely express my disappointment that he didn't even say, hey, someone else is looking at this. Are you like serious about this or not? But like, it's okay. Because like we were some 24-year-old kids who probably like at emo, we have such a hard time because that was even 2 years prior. It's like you go up to the DMG Mori booth and they like all but laugh you away. Like, I just wanted info. Like, what's a DMU 50 cost? What's your cheapest 5-axis cost? Because I wanted to buy a quality machine. And like, I went over to the Doosan booth, and I'm sure they're nice people, but I stood in front of the DVF 5000 just trying to like get a ballpark price on it or like get anyone to talk to me about it. And like nobody even approached me. But then you go to other places like Matsura, those guys were happy to talk my ear off. Makino guys knew we weren't serious, but we're still happy to educate. Okuma were hit and miss, but like, we hit everybody. We got a really good feel for all the companies. And like in the end, Haas made the most sense for price and control familiarity and local support and just kind of being an entry-level machine, which is what we needed. We needed a 5-axis, not the best 5-axis.
Right. Well, and even like the Doosons are expensive. Like
I found that out now, but I figured, okay, it's the same size, and I think Doosan competes with Haas on like their verticals in a lot of cases. So it's like, okay, maybe that's worth a gander. But long story short, we bought the Haas. We bought the UMC 500 because our salesman was very kind and made us the same deal on a new build.
Wow.
Because we were kind of upset and we're like, hey, like we were serious. We just didn't want to say, yeah, we're buying this. Here's a PO before we actually got approved for financing because we didn't really have business confidence on big purchases. Like I realize now that banks will happily give you any amount of money for the most part, because they're getting theirs either way. They're either getting the interest from you or
they're getting the machine
and also everything you've already paid them.
Yeah.
So they'll loan you stuff to a point where it's predatory. So I'm like, I probably should have just said, yeah, we'll take it and sort out the rest later, but yeah, whatever. But yeah, we had awesome interest rates because of the previous year's events. We got the previous year's pricing, but we got a new build machine, same identical specs, except they left off the $95 mesh basket thingy, which actually is apparently a critical piece for that machine. So today, our shop consists of the original Kia that we brought back from the dead, that VM3 that we bought, and our UMC 500, plus some other stuff along the way. We got our surface grinder. They were actually about to throw it out at an auction. It's a Brown & Sharp 612 Micromaster. Not for the X-axis traverse, it's not the hand wheel, it's just a handle. So you don't have like super fine X-axis control, but if you're actually going across big parts, it's super nice because you just crank the handle up and down rather than around in circles, which is kind of cool. So I got a pretty nice surface grinder, and I guess it just didn't meet the reserve, but that meant that it was going to go in the dumpster for scrap value. And I was there getting some other stuff. I bought like some used Cat 40 set screw holders for my Miltronics at the time. And I'm like, hey, do you have anything left over that wasn't purchased? They're like, yeah, we got a few things. And they like guided me around. They showed me the surface grinder. I'm like, what would you take for it? They're like, $250. Like, let me bring my truck around. And I grabbed the riggers on site to put it in my pickup. And I drove this like 1,500-pound surface grinder in the bed of my pickup across town. Sketchiest thing ever. I put some Harbor Freight like towing straps around the lifting bars, and then I put that through my tow hitch just as like the Jesus strap in case I had to hit the brakes. I did not want a surface grinder in the passenger seat. So yeah, surface grinder get. I bought a manual lathe from a buddy of mine who needed to downsize his shop. So we've got a manual lathe, we got bandsaw, we got the 3 big mills, and that we're pretty stuffed right now. Then inside, I've got a big surface plate. We got a good deal on a Tesla Height 700 height gauge. One of the Haas demo days, it was like a new in box return. Some company had bought it for a project, never used it, and then they just sold it back to the company for cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So that company sold it to me for cheap. The price was originally closer to MSRP, but then by the end of the Haas demo day, we'd stuck around for all the free food and stuff because still poor. I would never turn down free food. And at the end of the day, we'd gone, oh, that's kind of nice, but it's a little more expensive than what we want to pay. And we were either going to try and buy a 4th axis or we were going to get this height gauge. And they made us a deal we couldn't refuse. So height gauge, now we are real metrologists and can measure things out to more decimals than I thought you could possibly measure. I still think the last one is a guess on that thing because it goes to 5 decimals in inch mode and 4 in metric. I'm suspicious of that last one, but I at least know to 10,000ths or to hundredths of a millimeter that it's going to be good.
Mm-hmm.
And I can measure parts 18 inches tall, and I can measure bores and bosses and things with it. And I love that tool so much. I'm a little sad that I don't have the one with the color display and the other more modern fancy features, and it's not motorized, but in the end, it does what I need it to do. And as a prototype shop, I don't think I'd ever use the motorized stuff anyway. By the time I get it set up and programmed, I can just boop it twice and be done. So other things we've added in the shop, we've got an anodizing setup upstairs because I got really sick of sending stuff out to other vendors who would charge me a lot of money for quick turnarounds on one little part. I'd send them something that's the size of one of my earbuds. And it's okay, that's a $150 min lot charge. And then it's double because you need it in 3 days. And then there's a surcharge for waste disposal. And then, oh, you want it black. We're not running that till Friday, actually. It's okay, I've tried all the vendors in the area. They're all terrible. That might just be a Central Florida thing. Sorry, I'll modify that. They're all terrible or terribly busy and cannot cater to my prototype, short turnaround, low quantity jobs. They want the bigger stuff that is on more predictable timelines, which I totally understand, but it just made it hard for me to compete on jobs that needed anodizing with other shops they had someone down the road who for $75 would turn something around next day, any quantity of parts they can carry in their 2 hands. So yeah, so I started doing some anodizing, and I've taken 3 separate cracks at it. Once at the hackerspace, I made some NES controllers out of metal, which are awesome. Do not rage quit with those. They will go through your TV, unlike the originals. I briefly considered making metal Wiimote controllers, and then I decided that was a very bad idea. I would get sued or something.
Yeah, it sounds like a liability.
Yeah. Also, that was my first and only attempt at a product. I decided I did not like making products. I was better off making stuff for other people. I struggle with design and marketing and things like that. But as a service-based business, I do just fine. I'm okay with the rat race. Yeah, so I did some anodizing that time, and then I tried to get in this shop, and I couldn't get it to work consistently. And went back to shopping it out to other people. Found a couple of good suppliers elsewhere. So I've got an account for 3 days. But their same day rate was cheaper than any of my local places, 1 week lead time rate. So, what's a couple of overnight shipping labels from, I think ShipStation gets me good rates on that. So easy peasy. But again, lead time issues. So now we're doing some anodizing in-house again, and I'm having much more success because I'm using site.
It seems like you guys are doing some really good work. The pictures I've seen, you're getting really consistent colors and stuff.
On a fresh dye bath, yes. Day to day, it's okay. But if I leave it down, if I don't use it for a week or 2 and I come back, it's everything's broken again, and I may as well I have to start fresh. But I think I have that solved, and I guess that can kind of move on to this now that we're hour and 45 minutes in. Let's see. So,
well, hold on. Before we go on to other stuff, we had a ton of questions about that UMC, so I don't want to divert too far from that before we get into that.
Let's skip that section.
Yeah. Well, the first question from a guest, some guy named Nick P, said you should remember to post more pretty part pictures on Instagram.
Yeah, I always forget to post things on Instagram because so much of our stuff is under NDA. I take pictures of everything for record keeping, And because I like to look at the pictures of pretty parts that I made and have reference for the future, I take pictures of every fixture in case I need to go back to it, and I keep it loosely organized. But yeah, I need to make an effort to post more stuff. And also, I've had crappy phone cameras forever, so it hasn't been convenient to just go and snap a picture of what I'm doing and go post it. But I got an iPhone recently, and it has an awesome camera, so I'm trying to take more pictures. And I have a Nikon DSLR, and I just got some better lighting for it and a little photo booth. So we're going to move from quarter ass to maybe half ass.
All right.
And I don't know if we'll ever make it to full ass, but we'll see. I'd at least like to have an Instagram page that people can look at and go, oh, hey, those are interesting parts that they're making. But
Right.
Of course, all of them, as with most job shops, all of my best work I can never show anyone. And I'm so sad about that, because I see people posting these really cool parts and they get a lot of engagement. People get to know them because they make crazy parts. I'm like, I do that too.
Right. I'm right there with you. I just spent we were kind of talking about this over DM on Discord, but the last, I don't know, month or so, for me, November and December are always my busiest months of the entire year. They account for a large portion of my yearly gross.
Yeah.
Just because all of the engineers are like, oh, I've got a budget that needs to be spent by December 31st.
Yeah, I'm getting slammed right now too. I'm like, guys, it's December 14th. I'm done on Friday. I'm sorry.
Yeah, literally as we started this, I got an email from a customer that was like, hey, I need these 4 parts rushed in 2 weeks. And I'm like, that's Christmas and New Year's. You do realize that, right? I'm just going to charge you, but you'll pay for it, but I'll do it. It's okay.
Yeah, I've decided that this year I'm not doing it. In the past, I have made good money on holidays, but I need to give myself a break. I have burned myself out and then burned my burned out self out.
I'm now 44 days into full time at my shop. So at this point,
I haven't gotten to that episode yet. Congratulations.
Yes. Thanks. So yeah, November 1st is my first day. So we're doing fine, but I'm very much feeling that pressure now of well, I've got to do everything. And they're not everything, but almost everything.
Urge, try not to burn yourself out. I have to say from experience that mental health is one of the more important things to try and maintain as a self-employed person, especially in something like machining, where doing more work directly translates to making more money. It's really tempting to always say yes, and that will absolutely murder your sleep schedule, and it'll mess with your head. And you can do it for a while, but if you're running on emergency backup power constantly, you can only do that so long. And I did that for so many years. I guess I'm now 5 years into doing P3D, and 3 or 4 years into doing it full time. And I backed myself into a corner so hard the first few years, and I'm now having to go and undo all of that. And I'm trying to get in touch with some doctors and get some meds or something to just help me a little bit, because I have developed some reasonably serious depression just as a result of running myself into the ground all the time. And everything has always been an emergency, and I don't really have a great coping mechanism, because what I do when I'm really stressed about stuff, or when I'm really worried about something, is I distract myself with more work, which is what caused the problem in the first place in many cases. Or at least, the work took up all my time, which made me stressed about the other thing. And
right.
Now everything's on fire, but it's always been on fire, and I don't know what's even burning now.
Yeah, you're just that meme of the dog sitting in the room. Don't get
yourself into that hole, because it's hard to dig yourself out of. And I know I've chatted with some of the guys on the Discord who have told me better. It's yeah, I know, I'm working on it. And all the people who know me know that I push myself, or at least have historically pushed myself way too hard. And it bit me, and I'm paying for it now.
Right.
But I like to think that I'm at least self-aware. And I don't know, when in doubt, there's dark humor or whatever. So
far it has been probably the biggest increase in mental health I've had in a while, because
that's good.
My wife won't let me. She has given me all of the leeway in the world for the last 5 years of me doing this, and part of me going full time was okay, you have to spend more time with me and be home for dinner most nights. And so I can't burn myself out that much. I have to not only do I want to spend more time with her, but I have to spend more time with her. So yeah, that's been a good thing.
I made the awesome decision and also mistake of, Katie's the one responsible for the business existing. She's the one who like pushed me to make it all happen, and she's been here the whole way. But because she also works here, she'll just stay here late at night with me and like make sure that I remember to eat once in a while when I've got my head in the machine. She's like, "Hey, you should eat some dinner before you fall over." And like when we've got those long production runs that we're like just barely gonna get shipped out in time, she's the one who can go and like run the machine and run the anodizing, and like she is absolutely invaluable. And then when we're not putting out fires, she runs the books and deals with customers sometimes. But unfortunately, she's involved in everything, so we both do the same thing, and it's taken a conscious collective effort to dial things back. But it sounds like you're at least off to a good start.
Yeah, it's gone really well. It's definitely a new kind of stress, like you said. I'm now directly responsible for my own income, and working on all of that stuff has been kind of a crazy fun. Dealing with government agencies is just sometimes mind blowing how stupid they are. Like, I just finally ended my saga of dealing with unemployment insurance today. Unemployment insurance, because
I remember the beginnings of that conversation from earlier today when I was listening to like episode 105.
Yeah, so it's the dumbest thing. So I signed up through Gusto, who I'm using for payroll, and like they have like a partner that will do all your corporate filings, and they filed it, and then they need your unemployment insurance number to process that. But then I get a letter from the state saying, well, you haven't had any payroll, so you don't meet the requirements, so we're not opening your account. You're exempt. But the second you pay yourself, $1,000, you have to let us know, and then we'll open your account. And so
we've been through this.
I was like, you gotta be kidding me.
Here in Florida, we can be exempt. Like since Katie and I are self-employed, we are exempt from workman's comp. And then we hired somebody earlier this year. More, I guess, we can talk about that more later, I guess. But we hired someone. No, wait, it wasn't earlier this year. It was last year. Whoa, time flies. Anyway, we hired someone, and we're like, do we need workman's comp for him? And we got workman's comp for him. And then after a year, we were renewing, and our person was like, wait a second. How many employees do you have? What size is your business? Like, oh, actually, no, you don't need this. Why are you paying us?
Oh, wow.
So we canceled that. But then, of course, state was like, oh, why'd you cancel this? Mm-hmm. We're like, oh, yeah, apparently we've been exempt. So yay.
Right. Okay.
That's the side of the business I don't like. Really, in the end, in a perfect world, I want I just want to make parts. I really love just making stuff. I don't like dealing with the money or the business side or the people. I want parts to show up on my job board and just have a challenge to solve.
Right.
That's what I really love about it, which it means I'm a terrible businessman, which is probably why I don't have like a gigantic shop with like 30 employees and, or like products or whatever else. And like a couple of things are probably dysfunctional here that probably could be better, but I don't know. I don't really have any desire to have a gigantic shop with a bunch of people to manage. I like kind of being down in the weeds, like John Grimsmo. Like he's got this shop with all these people, but he's got other people managing the high level stuff.
Right. You want to be a technician. Totally.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The E-Myth, I think I read/listened to that last year at some point.
Yeah, it's good. But, so before we get far from the UMC, that's where I started this, and then I quickly derailed us. So the questions we had, John Fettig asked, what are the real life tolerances? Boone Freeman, you already answered the why not an SS version, but what fixturing are you liking most? And then Sequoia Manufacturing asked, after having the UMC for 6 months, what's your spindle uptime and what were you expecting? And if you had a second chance to make a purchase decision, would you go with it again?
Okay. So real life tolerances, do you need to do it once or 1,000 times? This is not the machine I would buy for high production for several reasons. I'll get into more of that in a moment. However, day to day, doing prototype work, it's been quite accurate for me. I've never really struggled to hit a tolerance that I needed to hit. The only thing that I have problems with is over at B90. If I calibrate the machine at one temperature and then I go and I like face a part on one side, flip it, face it on the other side, like just rotating the C-axis, I'll get a pretty big height mismatch sometimes, like 3, 4, 5 thousandths. But I don't have air conditioning in my shop yet. I'm hoping to rectify that in like the next month. So if it was calibrated and it was like 85 in the shop and now it's 75, like the machine moves around quite a bit. So I don't know that's something necessarily inherent in the machine. That's just my environment. And there are probably other machines that are a lot more thermally stable that wouldn't have that as much. But I found that it's generally adequate. If you're doing job shop work, that's like plus or minus 5,000 most stuff, and then you've got a hole that you need to interpolate to, 1,000th, and you got something you need to go and ream to a few tenths, and you've got the oddball feature that you need to mill a slot that's within a few tenths. It's going to do that. It'll be fine. Just don't expect to set it and forget it forever. I mean, it's a Haas, it's a value machine, and it's a Haas that's a wet floppy noodle with 2 additional wiggly bits. So you can kind of just do the math on that. It's not a Kern. It's not a Hermley. It's not even a Doosan DVF. But it's a big step up from like a trunnion taking up space on your VF3 or like one of the little teeny TRTs. Like it is a full universal machine. You have a lot of working area, even in the 500. And for that, it's really actually surprised me. But I would say that the biggest issue with the UMC, the UMC 500 specifically, well, 2 things. One, the chip management is horrible. The chip and coolant system was an afterthought. Nobody tested it. They were like, "Oh, cool, that's a machine, and we got a trough here. Let's shove a conveyor in it and put our same coolant tank under it. But let's leave out all the geometry that actually makes the regular coolant tank work right, and keeps the chips from getting into it." Yeah, got big issues with that. It will try and flood your shop if you don't pay attention to it. That's also why it's not good as a production machine, because that little basket that is supposed to catch chips and stuff just fills in like 45 minutes. It's bad. They have a retrofit kit that's supposed to reduce that, and it does reduce it. It's manageable. I check it like twice a day now, but don't leave that machine overnight. Don't buy it with the pallet pool and the robot and the automation. But buy this as your prototype machine for low volume stuff. And then, the other thing on the SS is just, or not on the UMC is that it just grows a lot, because you've got this rotary on one section of the casting, and then you've got like the x-axis riding on the main casting, and then the y-axis riding on that, and then the z-axis riding on that. So all of your linear axes are stacked on each other.
Right.
And then below that, you've got your 2 rotary axes stacked on each other. And then you've got your tool setter, which is on like a 3-foot long pole sticking out of the bottom casting. And that, like, I assume it's stainless steel or something. So I don't know, what's the linear coefficient of thermal expansion for stainless steel? Like, you can just figure out where your tool setter is moving based on your shop temperature. So if you touch off a tool early in the morning and then later in the afternoon, the rest of the machine aside, your tool setter has changed position.
Right.
So I actually keep a master gauge length tool in there, and I'll just go and probe that real quick and basically do a global offset on everything to keep it all in about the same place. But if you got AC in your shop, it's a good machine.
So what about fixturing?
Of anything else too. So fixturing, I've been running the Rocklock system from 5th Axis. It's fine. The only bad thing I have to say about it has been rectified, which is I have had some pull studs break on me. Usually just when I tighten it, I'll notice that it'll tighten most of the way, and then it loosens up again, which is not promising. So I've broken 3 separate pull studs. They sent me replacements, to their credit, immediately. They overnighted them. I was very thankful for that. And then after the 3rd one, they're like, "Hey, we think something's wrong." And they sent me all new clamping trucks, the actual gold bits that move in and out. Brand new ones for all of my existing fixtures, not just the one that I was having problems with. And since then, no problem. So they must have just changed something about the geometry to not stress the pull studs in whichever way they were breaking. And maybe they changed the heat treat on the pull studs a little bit so they were less brittle. Whatever the case was, based on the past 3 or 4 months, it seems to have been rectified. So nothing negative to really say there. If I were to do it again, I'd probably buy Lang, because they just seem to have a better reputation. And I think their vices are a bit nicer. But in the end, it's a 96 millimeter 0-point system. Everyone's got their take on it. They all work about the same. They all cost about the same for, broad gestures, and they all offer similar products. Mm-hmm. So if I ever tooled something up again from scratch, maybe I'd buy Lang and get all new Lang base plates and swap out my pull studs, but still be able to use my existing fixtures. It's fine. I've put big pieces of metal on it, holds it very securely. That's just like pull studs straight into aluminum or steel. Sometimes I want to throw an orange vise on there because I've already got a ton of Carve Smart jaws, and maybe I've got a job that was set up for the other machine, one of the 3-axis mills, but that machine's busy. I don't want to reprogram and all that. So I took an orange vise and I just milled my own rock lock 96 millimeter pitch holes into it, threw some pull studs in. It's heavy as hell, but you can get it on and off of there, and then I can run my entire orange vise ecosystem right on top of the rock lock and the UMC. And then if I want to go put a collet chuck back in it again, or one of the 5th axis self-centering vices, you first disassemble the entire vise so you can lift the body, and then you take it off the machine, and like you're changed out in 2 or 3 minutes. So
yeah, they are heavy.
Yeah. And I haven't done anything crazy like Marv from Kern, where I'm not machining a squirrel with all kinds of crazy 3D surfacing that needs to blend right, like over a 3-month period interrupted. So I can't vouch for the repeatability of any given fixture. If I machine something one day and I take it off and I put it back, I haven't actually done any testing to see if things are going to line up again and blend, but I assume it's worst case within a thou or two. Mm-hmm. And most stuff I'm programming off of a common point and I'm probing it. So if I somehow interrupt work, it's going to be in like a semi-finished state, and I'll pick it up later and do the finishing all in one shot. So like I don't care as much about the absolute repeatability. I know like Aroa and 3R and all of those guys are the kings of that, but they have their own compromises and costs. Sure. So I'd say it's fine and it's readily available. You can go on their website and buy it, or you can call any tool distributor in the US and you can either get 5th axis or Lang. So if you're thinking about it, give it a shot. It really makes a 4th axis a powerful tool with the addition of the angle plate. And even if you're on a 3-axis mill, just being able to ka-chunk something in the same place every time is worth its weight in gold. So yeah, I like it.
And then what about your spindle uptime? What is what you're expecting? And then would you make the decision again?
So keep in mind, I do like one-offs. So I am not particularly concerned with like, what is this uptime you speak of? So yeah, uptime is really relative. What I'm more concerned about is making sure that I'm getting my parts done on time, like when I tell my customers that I am, and with a minimum of setups. And that's where the 5-axis really shines. So this is where having any 5-axis is worthwhile. I don't need the raw accuracy. I don't care about chip-to-chip time per se. I kind of like spindle speed because I do a lot of like micro machining, a lot of small tools. But yeah, I don't know, as much as I'd love like a Speedio or something, like it wouldn't actually provide me any significant benefits over what I already have because I'm just programming heavy, and that's just how it is. We're getting other people in the shop online with programming progressively more complicated parts, so that will be less of a bottleneck soon. But I don't know when soon will be now. So for the moment, that's not a driving factor.
So then to reframe the question, is it providing you the value that you expected, and would you make the decision to buy it again?
I think so. I think it was the right machine at the right time at the right price point. Having the UMC versus just having 3-axis and lathe, or even when we just had 4-axis, we had our best year ever this year. And we only had the machine for like from June or July until present. So half the year, and it is our best year ever by like 80%, just because we've been able to push so much more work through, because I'm not doing 6 setups on a part, I'm doing 2, because I can do geometry that I couldn't possibly reach, wicked crazy undercuts, and with steep and shallow plus collision avoidance and fusion and some little bitty heat shrink holders, I can reach anything. And like, I'd love to have the SS machine for the faster rotary feed rates. Like that would be my one regret on this purchase, is I do wish I had the SS, not for the linear motion, but for the rotary motion. I think I get like 60 RPM on the table, which on big parts is fine, but on little stuff close to center line, like you go look at like Kerns and Microns and Hermleys, and it's like, oh my God, this machine is so slow.
Right.
But then I look at this compared to not having a 5-axis, I'm like, okay, no regrets.
Okay.
So if you got the money, get the SS. But if you got the money for the SS, maybe like you're in kind of a higher price tier, shop your other options. It may not be as big of a stretch to get something like much nicer. Once you start getting close to 200,000, it's like, okay, what's another 50 or $80K to get
Right.
a machine that's significantly better in a lot of ways. But at the like sub $150,000 price point that you can get a UMC 500 for, I don't know, you can't really be too picky. And like when setup reduction is the name of the game, it dominates.
Well, and it's really in the class on its own. I mean, it's that or a used 5-axis. You're not looking at other new 5-axis.
You get a used 5-axis, it's going to be the same price point. And now you have all the used machine issues. You got no warranty. You have no idea what's happened to it before. You're probably going to have to fix something. Support may or may not be willing to help you out. Like, you're on your own. Having done the used machine thing for a few years and had to fix everything all the time, it gets old. When you're in a business that's sufficiently mature where time is money, I don't know that I would ever strongly consider a used machine as your mainline machine.
Yeah.
As a secondary or a special purpose, yeah, sure. Pick up the used Swiss for your intro to Swiss machining if you've already got something established. But if that's your only machine, get something new, because just the confidence that having a working machine to start where everything is how it's supposed to be, and like if anything's broken, you can call them and someone will come out and fix it for free. Like that is worth its weight in gold if you've got work banging at your door who needs parts on time.
Totally. Yeah.
So,
well, that wraps up.
I like it. Also, get the 50 tool changer if you're a job shop. Don't get the standard one.
Or do you have the 30?
I have the 30. Get the bigger one.
Yeah. That makes sense.
30 out of 30 tools yesterday, and then I had to take down a few tools to run another job, and then I realized at the last minute that I had scrapped out a part because of something that I'd missed. I'm like, well, got to put those tools back in and go run it again. If I had the 50, I would have just left everything in there, and it would have saved me, an hour of going and putting everything back and touching it off and rerunning it carefully and making sure I didn't miss anything. And, it's fine. Like, it's what I do. It was just like a great big sigh of like, oh, come on, really? Mm-hmm. And having more tools set up to cover like steel and aluminum at any given time would be great. Because I keep a standard tool library, like many people. Pretty much 0 to 15 is empty. Those are job-specific tools. And then 15 to 31. 31's the probe, because I'm far less likely to accidentally call tool 31 in Fusion than to call tool 1 if I forget to renumber things. Mm-hmm. I do not want to explode my probe. I heard some differing opinions on that earlier in the show, or on previous episodes, about where to put your probe. So I'll weigh in on the last one in your tool changer, because it's really hard to auto number something to tool 31, but it's really easy to accidentally auto number things to tool 1.
Yeah.
Since probing is often the first thing you do, and Fusion will order things by the sequence in which they're used.
Right.
Although some controls you can lock that out and keep the probe from being spun up, but not all of them.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and then I forget what else I was going to say. Basically, face mills first in the list, 15 to 20 face mills, saws, things like that. And then end mills, I keep a 1/16, a 1/8, a 3/16, a quarter, 3/8, a half inch, and a chamfer mill in there in that order. Although, side mount tool changer doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. It'll get what it needs when it needs it. And then I keep some other specialty tools in there. I've got like some extended reach 1/4 inch end mills and 1/8 inch end mills for tabbing things off. I've got like a Sandvik flush cutting saw for when I really need to reach down somewhere and tab something off and do it in a hurry. I've got ball end mills in 2 or 3 sizes in there, and that pretty much takes up the upper half of my tool changer. And then everything lower is just like, I'll usually use like 5 specialty tools for a given reasonably complex job, but sometimes stuff is just tool heavy, and I'll fill up the whole thing. But I do that the same on both machines. The numbering is a little different. I maintain 2 libraries in Fusion, but one machine's a 12K spindle and one's a 15, so it doesn't bug me as much as if they were the same spindle RPM, where you could maybe share a little bit easier. Mm-hmm. But everyone's got a different way of doing it.
Yeah, no, and I think that the numbers, like you said, don't really matter. Like, you're falling in line with most of what I've heard anyway.
Yeah.
I completely agree. Well, that takes us on to shop news and new things. You had written down a few things. What's new in the shop?
Sure. Yeah, I just put some things there so that I remembered what the heck to talk about. So that Brown & Sharp Micromaster that I bought forever ago, I haven't used it for much. It has been unfortunately underutilized as primarily an end mill shank relieving machine. Mm-hmm. I have a diamond wheel for it and a little spin indexer, so I'll just instead of buying a $100 tool from Harvey, I'll just go and grab something off the shelf that I already have, neck it down exactly as much as I need, and then I can reach down in that deep slot without rubbing the whole way up. But I decided a while back that I wanted to take some time and like clean it up, make it a little nicer. And I had a job come in this week that was stainless steel, and it needed the top and bottom ground within 1,000th on thickness, and they needed a 1.6 finish on them. I forget. I always get confused on the metric versus inch surface finishes, but anyway, that works out to pretty fine because they were going to lap these afterwards. So I don't have a surface roughness tester, but I've got some like one of the specimen things. I'm like, okay, needs to be smooth, needs to be very smooth. So grinding is probably the best approach rather than trying to mill that. So I rough milled it, and then I was chatting on Discord getting some advice on like what abrasives to use, because I have a few wheels, but I don't know necessarily the right situation in which to use each one. So Adam and company gave me some pointers. I ground the chuck in, and then chuck looked horrible. It was like really dished and everything. But I took 2,000ths off total, which is kind of a lot from what it sounds like, but that's what it took to clean it up fully. And from here, I'm not moving the machine, so hopefully I'll only have to dust a 10th or 2 off of it if it gets scratched up in the future. Threw my grinding vise on, and I somehow nailed the thickness on the part within 10 microns. When I first touched it on the Tessa height, it read exactly the dimension out to 4 metric decimal places. Like, no way. And then I probed like 5 other points on that face of the part. So 50.5998, 50.5995, like, okay, it's good. I'm actually very satisfied with how it turned out, but it wasn't like literal perfection. It was just a lucky first touch that boosted my ego a bit.
Right.
So yeah, that worked out great. So the Brown and Sharp is finally like set up to actually grind things. I may find a little bit more grinding work in my future just because it's kind of soothing and fun and an aspect of machining that I've wanted to dive into for a while, but my work doesn't usually justify it. But I also don't seek out work that justifies it because I don't do it. So, you gotta, it's like a chicken or the egg thing, or if you build it, they will come. But I'm not out to do any serious tool making stuff. I've got the tool. I'd love to use it once in a while.
Definitely.
Make some things very flat and shiny. Other things that are kind of new. So we've got this awesome surplus store near us called Skycraft. If you ever visit Orlando, you must stop by Skycraft. They've been around for decades, and they have all kinds of electronics and industrial surplus. There's like World War II era bombs hanging from the ceiling. There's model airplanes. There's like rocket engines and stuff. Just like their ceiling is decorated with all kinds of really interesting stuff. And then you look around, there's like vintage electronics. There's, what do you call it in automation? There's like the light curtains. Yeah, there's just like light curtains floating around in the corner. You can go buy a light curtain for $20. There's like an entire wall, like an 80-foot long wall full of bins with resistors and capacitors and reed switches and MOSFETs. And like, if you need an electronic bit and piece, you go there, and it's all just surplus, so it's cheap. And then they've got wire. If you ever need wire around here, you just go to Skycraft because they buy like used reels of it, like partial reels. Right. They'll spool it out for you, and it's like a quarter of the cost of going to an electrical house.
Wow.
So I love Skycraft, but they posted on their Facebook page this week that they had these like metal racks for sale, and they're $10 each, like 18 by 36 racks. And in my shop, stuff is piled up on every flat surface around, as is typical. And I'm like tripping over things that are on the floor, and I have tons of ceiling space, or like vertical space. I could put things on shelves, but my walls are made out of cheese, and I can't really mount anything on them. Mm-hmm. So I have these racks for $10, and we went and we bought like 4 of them. We would have bought more, but they were going like hotcakes because that was a really good price. And like it's a little thing, but I'm so excited to have racks in the shop that I can put like fixtures on, and they're not just on one of my carts, because my carts are supposed to be for jobs in progress. But they usually turn into fixture storage because I'll have like the orange vise and the all the 5th axis stuff on one next to the UMC, and then I'll have like the Pearson vacuum plate on one next to the VM3, along with like some orange vise jaws that I interchange. So I never have a place to put my parts. So this has just solved that, because I have a bunch of dead space behind my machines that I can't really use because I might have to open the doors or like get back there for maintenance, but it's very rare, and I can move these racks if I need to. So yeah, for $10 each, I am so happy, because I spent like $200 on a rack for all my anodizing stuff, and it's not that much bigger or more substantial, but they're expensive new, and these were cheap.
Nice.
So, little things you get excited about as a business owner.
Oh, totally.
All right, I think it's been mentioned before on this podcast, but like other little things, little shop improvements. I only have little stuff right this second. Those like small inductive heaters for like removing stubborn nuts on cars.
Works for shrink fit.
I've been torching my heat shrink holders for like a year and a half, and I hate it, and I always feel like I'm going to burn down the shop waving the MAP gas torch around. So yeah, like $180 on Amazon, and this thing works great. It'll do a 1/2-inch holder in like 30, 40 seconds, which isn't fast, but it's not slow either. It's faster than the torch. And then my little 1/8-inch holders are like 10 seconds, and I can pop a tool in and out. And then I saw that there is a very fancy, very expensive German-made, basically an automated bucket for when you have your heat shrink holders and they're hot and you need to cool them, and you just like put it in this machine and it fills it with water, and then it empties the water and it blows off the water and like finishes cooling it with air. Like, okay, so if these guys are officially endorsing dunking your holders in water, why do I need one of those shrink machines that is going to like blow compressed air on it for me and cool it if I can just dunk it in a bucket of coolant? So I've been doing that, and I think as was discussed, their H13 tool seal, they should be fine. And if I get 300 cycles out of it instead of 3,000, I'm running prototypes. It's fine. I'm not changing tools out. I'm not wearing tools out for the most part, especially since most of our work is aluminum. So I'm perfectly content with that. If I get 300 tool changes out of a 1/2-inch heat shrink holder, I'm a happy camper, and I'm content to throw it away at that point.
Yeah, you can amortize a new holder into your next job and call it a day.
That's easy. Yeah. I'm not like filling up 20 machines either where I might have a significant holder refresh cost. I have like 8 heat shrink holders between my 2 mills.
Right.
And everything else is, a lot of it's actually ER16 and ER11. Those are the sizes I use most just for general purpose. I've got some ER32. I've got some SK10. Don't have anything fancier really. But, drills, non-critical end mills go in ER. Important stuff and tight access goes in the SK or the heat shrink. Mm-hmm. And that's worked really well for me, just doing generic stuff. And I buy usually whatever I need when I need it. So when the demands justify it, I'll buy something crazy, hydraulic or whatever, but there just hasn't been a need.
Totally.
So let's see, other things. I have one of those Harbor Freight blast cabinets. It's terrible, leaks everywhere. It has a really hard time feeding media, but people ask us to bead blast things all the time. And I also, because it leaks everywhere, I've got to like wear a respirator, and then I find little glass beads settled on surfaces throughout my shop. And I don't love the idea of that being anywhere near all my high precision machines. So like even with a vacuum on it, they still settle in like a 6-foot radius. So I said, enough with all that noise, and bought one of these vapor honing cabinets, which sound intriguing. I still haven't received it, and I need to actually ask them where it is, because it was supposed to be here by now, but whatever, holiday rush or end of year sales push, maybe it's a little delayed.
Did you buy the Weekend Warrior package or whatever?
Yeah, okay. I think a couple of other guests have purchased that one. And from what I understand, it will produce pretty much the same results, but because it's using water primarily instead of like just the air, it's a little bit softer, and you don't get the same like really sharp points and like deep valleys that you do with conventional media blasting.
Well, and the cleaning aspect is the one I'm very curious about, because
fingerprints.
It's the worst.
You literally can't touch a part, at least with the media I've been using, and maybe I'm doing it wrong, but the media I've been using, you can't touch a part. It sticks forever. And even if you go and you anodize, it still feels a little bit rough afterwards. I've tried different media, different pressures. It's all still kind of the same result. But the vapor honing, it looks like it gives you the same finish you get on like a MacBook.
Right.
Like that really nice satin bead blasted finish that's smooth. And maybe there's more to that fancy MacBook finish, but based on what I saw on the Vapor Honing Technologies website, assuming they're being transparent with what it will actually produce. And of course, they're always going to put their best foot forward. But like, even if it does half that well, I'm sold, because the parts look really nice. They look really consistent, and I should be able to take those straight from bead blast into anodizing. and not worry as much about embedded silica and things like that, which can be a problem with anodize.
Oh, I bet.
So yeah, I'm excited for that. I got the open loop system because I was told the closed loop is really high maintenance. From what I understand, that means that it has to be hooked up to plumbing, which could be an issue because I have no idea where I can hook it up to plumbing in my shop. My bathroom is in the worst place, and that's the only place I've got like water and drainage available.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe I'll figure something out. In worst case, I'll call them and say, "Hey, I screwed up. Send me the closed loop conversion. It's like $600 or something."
Right.
And I'll do it that way. This was just kind of an impulse buy, honestly, but I just got so fed up with the beat blasting. Like, okay, there's a better way. Let me find it.
Yeah.
And it was inexpensive enough that I can take a gamble on it, and it can't be worse than Harbor Freight.
I've been looking at converting ours because we have a Gray Mills cabinet that we got on Craigslist, and I think it was a vapor honing chamber at some point because it's like a full stainless enclosure and seems like it was used for some kind of wet blasting. Like, I don't know why you would have a stainless enclosure otherwise. And like looking at their website, it looks like maybe that's what it was. So yeah, I've been thinking about trying to convert it so that I could use it like that.
Okay. I'm really curious how that turns out if you do it.
Yeah, I'll definitely document it.
I mean, the Weekend Warrior is not offensively priced, and it seems like it, for my duty cycle, it'll be fine. Because their other ones are a lot more expensive, but they come with like the stainless or the the carbon steel cabinets, and they're heavier. And I think mine is just going to be plastic, but that's okay. I'm not going to be blasting 12 hours a day, 24 or 7 days a week. I'm going to be using it twice a week.
Right.
Maybe. So yeah, that's cool. Other things. So, UMC owners and maybe other next-gen control machine owners, don't use the Haas M130 function because apparently it will occasionally crash your machine. Whenever I check that box in Fusion to have it like post a thumbnail along with my program and like load it onto the machine control, most of the time it works every time. The other times I get really weird errors ranging from the machine locking up and not responding to anything, including e-stop or any button presses. I have also gotten the screen freezes, there's no alarm, the spindle drops a 1/4 inch, the spindle coasts down as if you just disconnected it from power and it's not breaking anymore. And the control continues to not respond until you hard power cycle it using the switch on the back of the machine. And I also got one where it was like alarm, resettable software error, alarm, non-resettable software error. It's like, well, which one is it then? In that case, it also dropped the spindle onto my part, broke my end mill, scrapped my part that I had a lot of hours into, and made me an unhappy camper. So what I did instead, because Haas didn't really acknowledge that it was a software issue, they tried to come out and like swap cables in my machine, which was, even the service tech was like, yeah, this is dumb. This is a software issue. But they couldn't really replicate it reliably. And like, it seems like it was random for me. It's happened like 5 times over 6 months of having the machine. The only condition I have traced it to is using the M130 display, both on the native Haas NGC, but there's actually an HDMI port on the board, and you can put an external display on it. So I was like, oh, cool, I'll put that on an external display and have a bigger thumbnail, and I won't like lose my offset screen every time it tries to load the media. But that actually caused the worst issues. So definitely don't do that. I imagine that's not a very well-tested feature. But yeah, don't use M30. Definitely don't use the external display. Instead, I just hooked up like a Raspberry Pi onto the same screen that I magneted onto like above my machine control. Mm-hmm. And I have an old iPad that I use as a Stream Deck substitute because I'm too cheap to buy a real Stream Deck. And it's like a couple dollars a month for their app, which is functionally the same. So I have a button on there that like toggles my speakers and headphones, that like screenshots something, that'll mute my speakers, and also one that has the UMC on it. If I click that one, it will take a screenshot of a specified region on my desktop, and I can specify it every time. And in like one click, it'll send whatever I screenshotted straight over to that Raspberry Pi. It opens it automatically, and it full screens it. So if I just need to see like a tool list and keep track of what I'm loading into the machine, like one button does that. If I want to send a fixture over for reference, like remember where to put the clamps, it pops it right above my machine, which is what the M130 is supposed to be good for, but obviously it has reliability issues
right,
that I'm not okay with I don't like leaving things up to random chance when it comes to a $150,000 machine tool.
No, and like once in 10 years might be something, but like that's once a month almost.
Yeah, I can almost repeat it. Like I never got it to the point where I could say, yes, this is exactly what triggers it, but I could make it do it enough times in the span of like a week, and then I turned off that setting, and it has not done it in like a month and a half. I'm like, oh, that's the problem.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, that was just a quick little workaround. And then something else kind of on the topic of like, where do I put that clamp? I got an iPhone and it does some really cool things. I got the 13 Pro Max because, well, A, it was the only one they had available because supply chain issues or whatever. And B, it has the time of flight sensor or LiDAR. I'm unclear on what the specific difference between those two is. And I don't know, maybe LiDAR is just like a copyrighted term or something. But anyway, you can pretty much point it at something and you can like range find it. You can touch 2 points and it's not just using like the camera optics properties. It's actually sending out some points and reading them back and saying, hey, this is this far away. But what they did is they built in this awesome augmented reality. It's not even like a separate app. It's just like built into the OS.
Right.
And you can load up, I think, .reality files and .usdz files into it. And you can place things, you can either view them just in 3D on your phone, or you can place them in your environment. And they'll react to things in the environment. So they'll see the floor and they'll place themselves on the floor. You can put something on your desk, or you can put something on a machine table. And it just happens that Hot Fusion recently started supporting USDZ export. So you could just go File, Export, USDZ, and Fusion on any old CAD file. And now you can view it 1-to-1 scale in your environment. So like first thing that comes to mind is like furniture. Yeah, IKEA actually has an app that lets you do this exact thing with their furniture. But my first thought when this feature came out was, hey, I just ordered that UMC. Let's see where it fits in my shop. So I downloaded the UMC model from the Fusion or from the Haas site, opened it in Fusion, and then I exported it for my phone. And plopped it in place. And I played around with it. I'm like, okay, actually, it might be a little tight to my lathe control with the chip conveyor there. So like, let's scoot it over a little to the right of where my masking tape was. And then I could actually walk around the machine in 1-to-1 scale. I could look inside it. I could stand in the lathe and see how much room I would have between my elbows and the chip conveyor. And that was mind-blowing. And it works so well. I know there was previous discussion of like virtual reality, building in Unreal, building your shop for use with like an Oculus Quest. I've got a Quest and I love it. I love my VR games and I do flight simming and stuff with that. But for the purpose of seeing how things look in context in a space, I got to say the iPhone AR approach is so much faster. And you don't have to build your entire shop in a game engine. You just use your shop as it exists and you drop objects into it.
Right.
And
well, so based on what you said, because you had posted, I think, in the Discord about you doing your UMC.
Yeah.
And I've got an Android, but my wife has an iPhone. And so I immediately, when we got the F600, I was building the entire shop in Fusion anyway to do all of the movement. And so I just threw that in her phone and blew it up to full size and was able to walk through my shop as it will be. And like, it was all because you posted that. I was like, sweet, I'll give it a shot. Like,
you're thinking of moving into a new shop. You don't even have the shop yet. Go find a big field, draw the shop in Fusion, export it to this big field and walk around for a bit.
Right.
You're going to look like a dummy. People are going to be like, what is that moron doing walking around in this field staring at their phone? Are they like playing Pokemon Go? Which actually would be probably a more understandable excuse, and like you just tell them that because people don't understand
machining
what you are doing.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, you can do that and like unlimited scale, whether you just want to see like a piece of furniture or like how big is a Space Mouse anyway? Like you can go and plop that on your desk. But yeah, being able to kind of preview machine purchases or just like even just things that you're lusting over, like how many machines can I fit in here anyway? And like plop a model of like 8 VF2s in your shop. Like you can do that. And it's built into iPhones, which 50% of people have. I think I don't know if it's only the Pro models with the LiDAR sensor or if it like only works better on those. But anyway, like modern higher end phones have some really cool tools.
Oh yeah.
What I did the other day is I was cutting this big acrylic part out, and on the second op, I just needed to do some countersinks, but it's like a 15 by 24 inch part. It's pretty big and it's pretty flimsy. So I put some fixture plates down on top of my orange vices. So I've got like some pallets for their pallet system that just have a bunch of fine pitch holes tapped in them,
Mm-hmm.
and set my part on them. Exported my Fusion model that had all my clamps in it, and then I just plopped that right on top of my real part so I could accurately place clamps, and I wasn't like trying to put a Sharpie in the machine to trace them or eyeballing it or like counting holes. I just put the part where I wanted it, and my clamps were visible on my phone, and so I just set each one where it needed to go and then tightened it down.
That's so cool.
And like the possibilities are actually really exciting, and just having references for that stuff that you can see one-to-one scale in context is like really cool.
Yeah,
So
well, they were
decided to do that at Autodesk. Please, like figure out how to make it work for Android so everyone can have the fun. But like, thank you for having the foresight to provide that functionality.
Yeah, seriously. Well, because like I want to say it was IMTS 2016. They took us on this field trip to, I can't remember what it's called, but it's like a DMDI, I think. It's like Digital Manufacturing Design Institute or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just outside of Chicago. But one of the booths that they were showing off was I think it was, might have been a HoloLens, but it was some kind of AR lens for assembly personnel. So it would like show you like,
Okay.
grab this screwdriver and then go to this hole. And like, if you did it wrong, it would like show up red in your field of view.
Man, that was the dream with Google Glass in like 2015.
Right.
I was really hoping that would stick around and we would have that sort of functionality. I think they still technically will sell it to like big enterprise customers for that kind of thing. But I don't think us mere mortals can get it and implement that. And really the iPhone is almost easier.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would love a world where you can have a little optic or something where you can view AR stuff and, you know, just see like, okay, how is this, like, you hire somebody and you want them to start running setups, build it in CAD, export it, send it to their Google Glass or their HoloLens or whatever, and then you just have to say, make it look like this.
Right.
And it's like a video game, just put the blocks in the like transparent spot that matches the block size, like Kaizen foam for everything.
Yeah. But there's like a lot of cool things you could do with machine tools. Like I would imagine that this is actually going to start coming up in the next few years because I'm seeing more and more VR headsets have pass through.
Yeah.
And so like think of how cool it would be if you're like trying to see clearances on a tool and you can like walk over the sheet metal in your machine and it would just show you through the sheet metal, like where the tool is and where the part is currently.
Feel like you're in a fighter jet, like looking through the floor at tanks or something.
Right. Yeah. How cool would that be?
That would be amazing. Yeah, I think we're getting there. It's going to be a really like cutting edge niche technology for a while, and then it's going to suddenly be everywhere.
Yeah.
But it's going to be kind of crappy and like very sparsely supported for some time, and then hopefully there will be some open architecture that enables it or something. Because if there's 15 standards, it's going to be hard to gain any momentum.
Yeah. Well, it's just like 3D printers when you started. You know, they sucked and they were hard to get and no information. And now you buy a Prusa and it works perfectly and you throw it on your desk and you're done.
Yeah, like, I put on the notes here. We got a Prusa. I mean, not much to say. Everyone's got a Prusa. But back in my day, uphill in the snow both ways, building printers from scratch, like getting them to print reliably was really tough. And that was a large part of what I did was just like printer maintenance. And now I'm like, I bought a Prusa Mini and I love it because I push the button and it makes a thing. And I don't think about it. And like, there was a time when I loved wrenching on things. Now is not that time. Now I really appreciate things where I can insert a nominal amount of money, get a reliable thing, and it does what it says on the tin every time. And like the barrier to entry is not even that high. Like a Prusa Mini is like $450 or something if you buy it pre-built. And like, okay, you buy an ender and some bed leveling stuff and a couple of upgrades, you're at the same price. So like, it's not even like it's a big price difference.
No, definitely not. So, yeah, it's crazy.
Prusa, and yeah, that's one of the beautiful things in life is reliable 3D printers.
Yeah, but I would imagine that AR is going to be like that and VR, in the very near future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, already just the low cost And the fact that the Quest 2 is standalone has made such a big difference. Like I bought one because it was $300 and could play games in my living room. So like I can go home at night and play some Beat Saber or something and get a little workout in. And I don't have to drag my gaming PC along with me because my gaming PC is my work PC because I'm only going to, well, first of all, graphics cards right now are nuts. So I cannot afford to build two, but even at the time, it's like, this feels dumb. Why would I spend so much time at work. I'll just play some games in between cycles. Now my nice graphics card is a business expense. But yeah, the Quest being able to do stuff standalone is awesome, and it has made it so accessible for so many people. Yeah, I'm really excited to see where that technology goes because it feels like we've kind of hit that critical mass that we need to get the widespread adoption. And now with more people involved, you get the folks who come up with the novel ideas that will really like make the most of the technology.
Yeah,
or when it was just a very small group of people who were just trying to get the darn thing to work, you don't have as much time to think of the creative applications.
Right. Yeah. Well, that brings me to the last question I ask every guest, which is, what did you research this week?
Okay. I'll try to keep this short, but it may not be. So I'll start with the shortest items and move on. So I mentioned I do some flight simming because I can't or don't want to afford to get my pilot's license yet, and I don't really have the time for it at the moment. What with the running a small business, which is several full-time jobs in and of itself. I will do that eventually, but until then, I don't even have time for RC planes. So flight simming is it because I can sit here and learn to start up an F-18C Hornet from cold and dark and go and do an intercept over the North Sea and, launch AIM-120 AMRAAMs in DCS World while my machines are running. And that's a ton of fun. So I'm a DCS World nerd, and I play some Microsoft Flight Simulator and IL-2 as well. And VTOL VR is actually fantastic. If you're a VR person and you don't have any other hardware, like VTOL VR is the best flight sim experience I've ever experienced in virtual reality, and it requires nothing but your VR headset and the hand controllers, of course. But I like all that. But I have a Logitech X56 throttle. I'm running a better stick now. It's just kind of a crappy, cheaply made throttle. It's one of the mass-produced ones. I get button ghosting, so I'm flying along in whatever, and like suddenly my landing gear's down, or it's jettisoned all my weapons, which is really inconvenient. Or I try to play Elite Dangerous once in a blue moon, and I'm flying along, and it's like afterburners engaged. And I'm landing, like no. Or I like just went and completed a whole mission, and it's like cargo bay jettisoned. Like really. So anyway, button ghosting is a problem with this. There doesn't seem to be much of a fix other than don't plug it into a USB hub, but I'm out of USB ports. And I like having my switched USB hub because some games don't like playing nice with all of my peripherals. Mm-hmm. Like they are looking for one Xbox controller and only that. So with like my joystick, my throttle, my rudder pedals, my track IR head tracker, my button box, my space mouse, which shows up as a HID joystick as well, like they just freak out. So I've got this switched USB hub that'll go and I can turn everything off. So I don't want to take that throttle off of the USB hub. So my really roundabout solution is possibly to just machine and design and assemble my own throttle for flight simming, because nobody seems to make a current F-16 throttle, and certainly not of any quality. And I fly the F-16 more than anything else in DCS. And I got a 5-axis mill.
I mean, it sounds like the only logical option at this point.
It is. It's really... It's not if I'll do it, it's when. It's a time thing.
Yeah.
So, but my Google history briefly wandered over to like the Reddit, like flight sim forum or the subreddit, and then some various forums where people have discussed this stuff. And it's like, okay, I need like a certain Arduino or this other board that somebody makes. I want these kind of micro switches. And I've got to do like this type of wiring so that I don't need 42 inputs. I can use like 12 of them with multiplexing and everything. Like, okay, I think I can handle that part of it. But now I've got to do all the mechanical design. And then I have to actually do all the DFM stuff. Even though I've got a lot of tools, you still have to make things easy for yourself where you can.
Right.
and then I still have to figure out like what shape it is. So it's a big project. I'm not doing this now or probably in the near future, but it is what I was researching for part of this week.
Okay.
Another quick thing that I'm struggling with is coolant disposal. I've got two 55-gallon drums of used Qualichem and other miscellaneous oils that I need to get rid of. And they're taking up space in my shop that I'd really like to have for maybe a future machine. And I just don't know how to get rid of them. I like Safety Clean wants like $800 for it, which is just
They're
too much. I
the
can't do that.
worst. Yeah.
But no one else in the area will give me the time of day, or nobody wants to touch it because they're like, oh, it's not motor oil. We don't know what's actually in it. Like we're not willing to look at this. And you go and you talk to the other waste disposal places that say they take oils, and they're like, oh, actually, no, we don't take oils, even though our website says it. And it's just 2 drums. It's not like I've got thousands of gallons that they might be able to like recycle and make some money on, or get their environmental credits for, or whatever. So if anyone knows a good company, either that's a national thing or that services the Central Florida area, let me know, because I'm willing to pay a few $100. I'm just not willing to pay $800 for 2 drums. Like that's almost what the coolant costs to begin with.
Right. We reached out to our coolant supplier, and they're the ones who told us where we go now. So that might be worth reaching out to.
Yeah, I mean, I use Qualichem, and those guys are always great whenever I have questions. So I will totally poke them and see if they've got any contacts. That's a good idea.
Yeah, because we were under the same thing. Like I want to say we had 4 55-gallon drums for a while, and we were like, this is taking up so much room in the shop. This is ridiculous. And then finally found this place that I want to say they're a quarter the cost of Safety Clean, or something like, and they drop off empties. They're like, oh, we'll pick up all your fulls, and then we'll give you some fresh empties that you can fill whenever. I was like, this is fantastic.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Because the other option is I separate it into 5-gallon buckets, and I go frequent every auto parts store that takes oil, and I give each of them 5 gallons, which I don't want to do, but I'm taking a week off after Christmas for shop projects, and I could burn an evening doing that and feel good about it, and it's probably still come out ahead.
Right.
But I don't want to do that if someone, because this isn't going to be the only time I have to do this. I'll have to drain the coolant tanks every 2 or 3 years at the latest, just because, it wears out, you get contaminants in it. I don't have one of those like $7,000 orange vacuums. So although I'm considering building the entirely crimson hacky vacuum that just uses one of the drums, but it still looks like it's a few $100 for the vacuum generator and a few $100 for the rest of the components, even if you make the actual hardware yourself.
Honestly, I'm at the point where I'm almost just ready to spend the $1,200 on the X-Air. Yeah. Like I would love the ability to do that, like, and be able to cycle my coolant out and get all the fines out, because I know there's a ton of fines on the bottom of all my tanks.
And I mentioned the UMC chip and coolant management is terrible. It's actually, anyone who buys one of those, do not buy it without a filter, or don't buy the Haas filter. Go on McMaster and spend $500 and get the Grimsmo filter. I did that, and it works awesome. Great filter life, no pressure drop or anything. Not $2,400 like Haas asks, but you need filtration. And you need that stupid $95 mesh basket that should just be included with the machine, because the conveyor dumps most chips into your buckets, and it dumps the other 30% of the chips into your coolant tank. And without that mesh basket in there, I clogged every coolant line on the machine within 3 days of having it. The wash down inside the machine, all 4 nozzles around the spindle, everything. It was bad. And my skimmer was just pulling out chips.
Oh.
So, yeah. No, you absolutely need the mesh basket at a minimum, but really I'd recommend no less than like 1 giant bag filter in between your coolant pump and the actual inputs of the machine, because otherwise it will clog everything and you will have to pull it all apart, and it's annoying. My Haas guys were absolutely flabbergasted that happened, and I can't believe they didn't know that was a problem. I can't believe they're selling that machine without like a mandatory filter. Like, just include the filter. Charge me another $2,000. I literally won't notice. Just include it so that I can't try and save $1 and say, oh, I'll add filtration later, and then in 3 days have to like poke a stick in every nozzle.
Right. Yeah.
Even my washdown hose, like that just hangs on the outside of the machine. That got clogged too. Like nice big orifice, still clogged with like full-size chips.
Yep.
So, yep. Okay. All right. Now the two topics of the day. These are like the big things that are on my mind. So anodizing. I mentioned I was having some inconsistency. I have been sciencing it up in here, and I just ordered a bunch of chemistry supplies so that I can titrate all of the baths, which basically means sampling each of the chemicals and then putting an indicator of some kind that will like change under certain conditions. And then you put some sort of reagent in there for like the cleaner, I think it's like hydrochloric acid. You put a certain number of milliliters of that in, you count how many it takes before it like rapidly turns to purple. You have your clear solution, goes purple after a certain point, and then there's some math for that where based on the number of drops it took, you can figure out what your current concentrations are and like if there are likely to be contaminants and things. So I've just been kind of blindly mixing things up to this point, and it's like gotten me by, but it's not been reliable. And especially over time, as water evaporates, I need to put some back in, but some chemicals are also getting dragged out on the parts. And like I feel like my concentrations of everything are going way out of whack from my initial measurements.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got some Erlenmeyer flasks and various reagents and indicators coming, and I'm going to do my best 8th grade chemistry and see if I can figure out how much sulfuric acid I have, how much aluminum I have dissolved, what my sealer condition is, what my dyes are doing. I can measure, I've got a nice pH meter coming, so I can measure how acidic or basic everything is, because they actually have pretty tight bands you need to keep them in. Otherwise, apparently your dye stops working, which I have learned.
Oh, no.
And also, if your pH is out too much and you have a shop that's always 95 degrees like mine, dye grows algae really readily. So
oh, really?
My black dye was being consumed by algae because the pH was off and because it was in a really nice warm incubator all the time.
Oh.
So it would work great the first day, and then I'd put it away for a week or two, and then there's some weird gloopy stuff I'd skim off, didn't know what it was. And my parts just wouldn't take anything. Like I'd get at best kind of a gunmetal color, not a nice black. And it was like splotchy and stuff. And that's because the algae ate the active components of the dye. So today I learned, a few days ago, I did the old Instagram shotgun, ask everybody who seems to be an expert questions approach, emailed or messaged like a dozen people who were doing really good anodizing work. I'm like, hey, what dye do you use and what am I doing wrong? And a couple of them didn't respond because they're inactive or they're busy or whatever. A couple of them were like, hey, it's like $300 an hour for consulting. A couple of them were like, okay, what's your pH? Have you checked things? What temperature are you using? And then some guy's like, oh, it's probably algae. I Googled it. I'm like, it's totally algae.
Oh.
But there's products to help prevent that. Google thinks I summoned it. I have a Google Home in the shop, and all my lights and my air compressor and some other things are on it. So I can say like, hey, name device, turn on the air compressor, turn on the lights. That's pretty nice.
That's awesome.
I can also turn off the air compressor if I leave something running overnight. Compressor doesn't chug along.
Ooh, that's really nice.
So anyway, yeah, anodizing. I learned some things. I'm going to do some science. And one guy in particular, aesthetic anodizing on Instagram, who does some amazing looking like paintball guns. He pointed me towards this company called Techavon, and I gave them a call, and they were just immensely helpful. They understood that I was a small shop and I'm not going to be buying like pallets of their stuff. And they still spent 45 minutes on the phone to like get me sorted out, figure out what I needed. They sent me a bunch of sample stuff to just get me started. And even though they normally only sell like pallets of their chemicals, they're going to package some up into like 5-gallon buckets for me so that they can ship me smaller quantities, because I can't store 400 pounds of degreaser.
Right.
That's just not practical. But I can store a 5-gallon bucket or two.
How cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm sure there are other great companies out there, but that was at least the first one I ran into who took me seriously and was willing to help me out troubleshooting. And like, I'm more than willing to pay, because I know what I've spent on like expedite fees for finishing suppliers every month for the past few years. So, I mean, almost any price is totally valid, just to be able to do that when I want in-house my way and not find out like the day the job is due that that I've got like splotchy parts and I have to remake them and they're going to be late. I can find that out immediately and remake a part and, address things real time.
And be on time.
and be on time. Like today, I had some parts that needed to go out. It was kind of a rush job, and they were clear anodized. And I started it at like 9 a.m. and I was done at 4 p.m. Like my tanks are limited size; they're like 5-gallon buckets, so I could only do a couple at a time. But even so, I could not have dropped it at the anodizers, gotten it through their queue, and then driven back there and picked them up at the end of the day, even if they could have turned them same day, and they would have charged me hundreds and hundreds of dollars for it.
Right.
And here it was like, okay, start a cycle on the machine, walk upstairs, rack apart, put it in, come back in 30 minutes, and clear anodized turned out great. Tomorrow I'm going to find out if that fancy new die actually works as well as it's all cracked up to be. But it sounds like it should, and I've got a lot more information to help guide me from here out on how to take care of it. And if I have problems, I have someone who's got my back with tech support, which is also what I was missing. Because before I was like buying the dies on Amazon or buying Caswell or something, and you didn't get that level of personalized support.
That's great that you found them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and anodizing is scary. Like it's got dangerous chemicals, so if anyone tries it, just be safe about it. There's at least when you're first starting everything up, you've got high concentrations of like sodium hydroxide, which will melt your skin off. You've got degreasers, which will remove all the oil from your skin and make you very dry. You've got sulfuric acid, which will melt your skin off. You have nitric acid, which will melt your bones off. And you've got sealer, which is kind of benign and sometimes just is hot water. And you've got dyes that'll make your hands funny colors. But like it's a little scary getting it started up, but in actual operation, the chemical concentrations aren't that bad. It's usually enough where like if you get a little bit on your skin, you can just go and dunk it in some clean water in the rinse bucket. And like you're not going to have a hole burn through your arm. I wouldn't recommend going fishing around in a tank without like shoulder length gloves. But if it's not like death, destruction, chaos, it's just be careful on the initial setup. Wear a lab coat, wear goggles, wear gloves, and you're okay. And
gotcha.
I believe the saying is add acid to water like you oughta, or add acid to water. Because I think the other way you get a highly exothermic reaction. Now you have acid splashing up on you, but if you have a large volume of water, it sort of acts as like you've got a lot of thermal mass, and it doesn't all try to react all at once. So even if it does kind of go exothermic, it can't get to a high enough temperature where it like boils and splashes back at you. But right. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a chemist. I'm not a lawyer. Do your own safety research. Yeah. And then finally, the ultimate question: what have I really been researching? I think I want a Datron.
Okay.
I was corrupted in 2019 at EMO. We walked by the booth and they were really nice to us, which was a stark contrast to a lot of the other manufacturers there who thought these two American kids were just goofing around. I mean, we were very serious, but like I'm sure they looked at us and they're like, yeah, we've been machining for longer than you guys have been alive. Like, what are you even doing here? There's no way you can buy one of our machines. But Datron was like, oh yeah, come check this out. Look, it has a touch screen. You can probe your part by just like drawing a circle. And hey, look, vacuum chuck. You can cut all the way through. And hey, 50,000 RPM spindle. And like, hey, look, here's a business card. It's super bent. We probed it 10 times and now we've engraved it perfectly. And like my eyes must have just gotten so wide because like, whoa, this is really cool. And it wasn't the perfect machine at the time because we didn't have a 5-axis yet. Like we really thought hard, like what's our next purchase going to be? Because a 5-axis machine and like a Datron Neo are approximately the same price, plus or minus. And a M8 Cube is the same price as like a somewhat nicer 5-axis machine. So are we going to buy a 5-axis first or are we going to buy a Datron first? And we went with 5-axis. It made more sense. Setup reduction, more diverse parts were the top priority. And another Haas machine that was easy to integrate and could do almost anything that the other machine could do if we're just short on spindle time. But we have the 5-axis now, and it's been doing well for us. And people keep asking me for plate work. And as much as I love Jay Pearson and his awesome vacuum trucks, it's just not practical for one-offs to go and make a custom top plate for everything. And I'm also tired of cutting down to like a little foil, and then 30% of the time I accidentally break through and, suck a bunch of coolant in the vacuum chuck and scrap the part and break the end mill. Like that gets a little old, or you leave a little too much on, and now you're sitting there with pliers, like cutting this little remnant off the outside of the part and then running it along the Scotch-Brite wheel to deburr it. And or you're super gluing things with masking tape down, which is just time consuming, although it does work quite well. most of the time. I still struggle with that. I think my coolant attacks it, and I don't get the same results other people do. But yeah, I'll cross that bridge at another time. But basically, people are asking us for stuff that's like 12 by 12, sometimes 12 by 24, sometimes like 30 by 30 inches.
Oof.
And I can't really do that, so I'm having to turn this stuff down. But it's from our regular customers who just like they make some product that uses all of these things. They've got to go outsource those to someone else, and they really want to pay us instead because they like us. So, and then of course, Xometry and Fictive, like no one has a big machine to do big plate work like that. Everyone's got a 40 by 20 mil, and they're in the same boat as me where vacuum work is a pain in the neck, especially for small quantities.
Right.
So we're just like weighing all of our potential use cases with our various customers. And I think just like a bare bones M8 cube with a pair of their vacuum chucks on it, so it can do like 1,000 millimeters by 1,400 millimeters or something like that. So that may be the wrong dimensions. Anyway, it's like 30 by 36 inches. I don't speak metric as fluently as I probably should once it gets into the larger sizes. Like end mill sizes, I got down pat.
Right.
For some reason, I have a hard time up converting, especially when I'm at the end of my day now. But I think that might be the machine for us because like as a main machine, I think it's really limiting. If you only have a Datron, it's kind of a light duty machine. It
Right.
doesn't have massive material removal rates. You can't run super long tools. You can't fit super tall parts in it. Your tool selection is really limited unless you buy the really expensive HSK spindle. And even then, it's still like an ISO 20 type diameter. It's not even like brother equivalent with the BT. So very limited scope of work. But I have a 40 by 20 VMC. I have a mid-size 5-axis, and I have a lathe. So maybe it's time to get that machine that's a little bit more specialized. It is really good at doing plate work so that we can take on these jobs that we haven't been able to before. And so that instead of spending 3 days trying to do like 3 or 4 little vacuum jobs, I can do it in 1 day because the setup time is reduced. And because you can punch all the way through with their vacuum card and the high flow vacuum pumps, I don't have to make top plates. The fixture time is 0 or near 0 in a lot of cases. And I can flip a part over and just put it right back on that same spot that I cut it out from, probe it in using their fancy intuitive touchscreen thing.
Right.
And then run the second op. And like, that's a highly templatable workflow for a lot of like 2.5 axis parts. Just plate with pocket, plate with thread milled hole, plate with fillets, radius. Like I can build a fusion template that can do all of that. And you drop your file into it, or nested on the bed, press Control G, and hey, you got a program. And it's because it's already set up like that, it's almost idiot proof because you can just make it so that it never tries to plunge into the vacuum table. And the machine has safe zone software so that you can't plug into the vacuum or plunge into the vacuum table, even if you do something wrong in CAM. So this is almost like, it'll be the most expensive machine we buy, but it'll almost be the easiest to run and the one that I can give to the least skilled person. So in this case, Katie has been trying to contribute more on the programming front because she sees how much we're bottlenecked there. And me and our other guy, Carl, who's been working for us for almost 2 years now, are like, we're busy with the difficult parts. So Katie's taking like one of John Saunders, one of the courses that they posted online. It's like $100 or something for CAD and CAM, because I just don't have the time to sit down and give her like personalized attention and teach her all of this stuff from scratch. But if she can get a good foundation, I can teach her the more specific things. But she wants to play with the Datron because to her, it feels like an approachable machine. It's a little less big and fast and scary. Fast it is, but it's a gantry mill. It doesn't have like 25 inches of Z travel. It's got like 8, and it should be pretty safe. So, yeah, I haven't pulled the trigger on that yet, but I think I've convinced myself, and I don't think I can unconvince myself that's the path forward.
That sounds, yeah, I understand that mentality, and like you said, it is very specialized. But man, you watch like what Eddie Kramer does with it, and like it is perfect for plate work. Like I don't think there's a better machine out there for it.
I was chatting with him, and it sounds like it's got a lot of like really good things and a few cons, but a lot of those are negated by me having other machines in my shop. Like I can work around a lot of the limitations with my other machines. I'm not going to put a 2-inch thick piece of bar stock in there and go and try to hog it out. I'm putting like 1/2-inch plate and thinner in it. And especially when people send me stuff that's like, okay, I need this to be 1-inch or 1/16 inch thick plate that's pocketed down to like 20 thou thick in this spot. Like, I can't do that in a vise.
Right.
And like even in the Pearson vacuum, the gasket pushes up hard enough that on stuff that thin, it's hard to hold accurate thicknesses. But on the vacuum card, it'll be a lot more even, and the cutting pressures can be lower because for the same feed rate at 4 times the spindle speed, your cutting pressure is way down, or for the same cutting pressure, I'm running at 4 times the feed rate. So
Right.
like things are going to be faster. Like slotting with a 1/16 end mill today was just unbearable, even with a 12 gauge spindle. And I did the math, and my cycle time on that part would have been like, it was like 28 minutes on my VM3, and it would have been 6 minutes on an M8 Cube. I'm like, by the time I was doing that math, I literally would have been done with the job and on to the next one. So now, at first, it's like, shoot, can I afford this machine? It sounds expensive. That's a lot for kind of a specialty machine. And now it's like, can I afford to not buy that machine? Like, when can I get it? And we actually just submitted all the bank paperwork so that we can just get a decision on it. And then if they're like, yeah, you can go buy that machine, then we'll send a PO off, and fingers crossed we'll have it at least in Q1 of next year, if not like January, because unless someone else has snapped it up, they've got one in stock. So that's still up in the air. Things could still go awry with that plan. But if things go the way I want them to, in this wonderful space right behind me that you on the camera can see and the listeners cannot, I'm going to move all these toolboxes and Scotch-Brite wheels and things of that type. Probably just scoot them to the left and, I don't know, make my stock prep area even more crammed and put the Datron right there. Because my shop's kind of an L shape for anyone who hasn't seen any pictures of it. So I have like the office, which occupies 1/4 of it. And then I've got 2 bays that are pretty much 20 by 20 feet. So I can fit a VM and the UMC in one bay, and like the Kia and my manual machines and my air compressor in the other bay. And there's not enough room really to put another full-size VMC. But there's enough room for a Datron, which is like 6 feet square maybe, because it's a gantry router and you don't need twice the table width. So like that's also another big selling point, is it fits our footprint and is low power, because we have 150 amps of 3-phase. We're topped out.
Mm-hmm.
I've got 2 30 horsepower machines, a 25 horse plus 10 plus 5 lathe. You're never going to run the main, the sub, and the live tools all at the same time, but it's real 25 horsepower, and it dims the lights when it spins up to full speed. It drives me nuts because I can see the flickering on the LED lights I installed in the office. I need to put some big capacitors over that or something. So like we're pretty much at full draw, but we only have, because we're prototyping, we run 1 or 2 machines at a time, and it's not an issue. Like the peak amps I've ever seen, I've got a logger on it, it's like 85 amps. So we're okay. And I can add shop AC, which will add like 20 amps. Mm-hmm. So now we're at 105 continuous at any given time. So a Datron is like a 2 kilowatt spindle, and then miscellaneous 1,000-1,500 watts of servo motors accelerating and decelerating, and then 2 horsepower vacuum pump. I can squeeze it in, and that'll be it. That is all our shop will bear until I can do a hostile takeover of my neighbor behind me and inherit his space and power. Although I wish him all the best success because I like him and he's got a cool woodworking business. But if he ever moves, I'm taking that shop.
Well, you'll definitely have to update us on all of that. I'd love to have you back on in a couple months so we can kind of chat more, because I know we've missed a bunch too. Like we haven't talked about
so much
employees or anything. So
yeah, I would love to come back on for another round, or do one of the roundtable episodes or something. Usually I'm happy to talk about all of this stuff, and there's always something going on, because job shop world. It's not just product release or production woes. It's 99 problems, but 5-axis ain't one.
I know the feeling. It's always what issue did I get myself into today? What quarter did I back myself into by saying yes?
Yeah, I always love listening to you and Easton and and Adam and everybody just talk about the issues you've been having that week on a certain part and how you tackle them. Like that is it's just so nice to know that I'm not the only one out there with these sort of issues. Like I'm almost yelling at the podcast sometimes, like, oh, I know this one. Either I solved this or I have an idea or something. Like it's kind of fun to play along.
Well, so real quick before we close, speaking of issues this week, I will share one that I encountered due to my own stupidity and just not thinking. So I was running this, as we talked about this last rush part as part of this last rush package that I was finishing up. I think I finished it up actually Thursday. It was supposed to be done Monday, but it started as a 12 by 12 sheet that was 500 thick. And for some reason, I think maybe it was the only stock I could find at the time when I bought it, but I bought bar instead of sheet. And so it was a half inch by 12 inches bar cut at 12 inches. And the parts finished at 375. So I had 60 thou to take off each side. And then, it's just not like a square. It was like some crazy shape that I had to cut out of the first op. There was like some really tight tolerances, flatness of 1, true position of 1, profile of 2. Well, I get done with the first op, pull the part off, go over to just real quick skim it on my lapping plate. And I'm like, oh, almost none of this printed. And then I go over to the surface plate and I check it, and it's out of flat by like more than the indicator can show, like 25, 30 thou. And I was like, maybe I over clamped it. So I run another one, I check it, I try some different things to see if I can recut some surfaces. And like, I cannot get it better than 20 thou flatness. And then I'm like, oh, you're an idiot. You bought bar stock. It has like crazy stresses inside of it. Of course it's going to warp like this. So the next morning I rush over to my material supplier, have them rush cut me some sheet, put it in, run the exact same first op, and it comes out flat within 3. And I'm like, well, I can live with that. Like the first surface I was cutting was not a precision surface. It just needed to sit flat. Like I knew I could suck down 3 thou with screws. There's no way that I could ever suck down 20 thou with screws and still have a good part at the end of the day.
Yeah, you're like stripping out the threads, just trying to crank it flat.
Yeah. So
I have been there and done that before. I had some parts recently out of UHMW. They were like little mounting tabs or something. Like, oh, this is an easy job, gravy. And I ran the first op. I was running like 5 of them in a strip across one of my vices. And I unclamped it, and they literally jumped out of the vise because I bought UHMW bar stock, and it has all kinds of stresses. So I cut them apart on my little portable bandsaw on the like vertical stand, and luckily it wasn't too bad once they were all separated from each other when they were 1.5 inches long, not 6 inches long. And then for the second op, I just clamped them down and gave them a good tap, and they were okay afterwards. I still would have liked them to be flatter, but they're also plastic.
Right.
So by the time the customer screws them onto whatever they're mounting them to and then exposes them to sunlight for like 30 seconds, they're just going to hold that shape now because UHMW.
Right.
But it still really surprised me when it jumped at my face from the sheer amount of warping that had happened. And then I also couldn't deburr them to save my life because it's just such a gummy plastic.
What is it? Not carbide, ceramic scrapers that Noga makes work incredible for plastics.
Okay. I've been meaning to pick one up. I just have never done so, I guess. But I was trying to chamfer them in the machine using like a brand new razor sharp chamfer mill, and it just made 2 more burrs.
Yep.
So, best of the best. Like I think I tried 3 different ones. I had a Mari Tool chamfer mill, one of their spiral chamfer mills. I had a helical, and I had like a Lakeshore Carbide one, all brand new. I think I even had a GW Schultz countersink. It wasn't really a chamfer mill, but I mean it was sharp. And none of them worked. They all just kind of did the same thing to different degrees. So same thing, job that I thought was going to be super fast, I ended up kicking myself for because Katie, the poor thing, had to sit there with the Noga and just deburr every one of them by hand. The Noga to take off the big burr, and then like an X-Acto blade for whatever secondary burr the Noga raised, even with a brand new blade in it. So yeah, that sucked. That was another job where I'm like, Datron would have been really nice right about now, because I could have, instead of running strips of bar stock, I could have purchased a 24 by 24 sheet
and done them all
together, done them all in one shot. And you can actually get backside deburring tools that you can sneak in. I think it's like 0.23 millimeters or something thick, or no, it's 20. It's like 23 thou. It's 0.7 millimeter thick vacuum card. This like porous cardboard they put on the vacuum tables. Mm-hmm. So as long as you don't punch all the way through that to your actual vacuum chuck, you can absolutely backside chamfer your parts after you cut them out.
That's awesome.
These were just parts that would have been one op if I could have done so. And it was, two ops and a lot of handwork in the VM. That was another one of those, like, I need that Datron moments. So, yeah. I hope it'll happen. I think it'll happen. But until it is actually here on my shop floor, I'm not going to, like, make any firm promises or say, oh, yeah, getting the Datron. And I'll find out that, like, the economy rebounded and it after COVID, and they're now going to charge me like 50% interest rate.
Right. I think it'll be all right. But you come back on and update us all.
I guess you guys will get an update probably on the Discord, and then also, I guess, if you have me back on at some point.
I definitely will. But in closing, Patreon thank yous. Thank you, Nick, for joining. I appreciate it.
I've been enjoying it. I've got to pay my part.
Also, Paul Sokoff and Chris Morris, thank you all for joining. It lets me do interviews like this and spend a couple hours with a fellow Insta machinist, which I always really enjoy, and send equipment to those who need it, and just take the time to really make the show as good as I can. So thank you all. And thank you again, Nick, for taking the time. I know, especially during this season, it is a big ask. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show.
I had a great time talking, and I don't know where the time went. Like, I'm so sorry for everybody who's like driving around the parking lot. Like, okay, when's he going to shut up? I've been doing this for 2 hours now.
Well, thank you again.
It can be a 3 commute podcast.
There you go. Yeah, I kind of like longer ones, because sometimes, I'll drive to the shop listening to it, run around doing stuff, and then come back home.
I've got my IsoTunes earbuds that I just put in the shop. They keep the noise down a little bit, and I get to listen to all my favorite podcasts. So it's wonderful, and more is better.
Definitely.
So awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again so much. This was fun.
Likewise. Thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. I'll be back next week.